has like the entirety of like the Phil Eklund library, basically. I think he owns every game possible. And they recently, and he's somebody who I think he does this to be nice, but like you talk to him and it's like, did you see this game? It looked like maybe it'd be interesting to you. And he's like, oh, I just, I don't have the money. I don't have the money to be able to buy the game. And then like Greenland and Neanderthal 2nd edition comes out and it's like, what's changed about the game? Nothing. Cosmetics. Just cosmetic and meeples. Cosmetic.
Meeples.
Like, and he's like, I'm getting that. I'm totally getting that.
And then he get hosed by this shipping thing. It doesn't know if he's going to get him or not. Yeah.
And yet Andy, because I've listened to like the last all y'all's episodes. When I discovered you guys last year on Good Bird Ugly. Actually, I discovered that after the long view. I went back and basically listened to all the episodes. And
I'm sorry.
And I love how
the journey. Sorry for either for myself now or for myself then, whichever one you hate more. I apologize for that.
No, it was good, and I love how you guys rip on Andy because basically, like, the shoddier the components and the more he has to make his own stuff, the more he likes the game.
Yeah, the more obscure it is, the harder it is to get, and the more he has to make it. It's like the best game. It just goes up on tiers and how awesome the game is.
He is like the perfect. He's like the perfect customer, like a publisher's dream. But
yeah, he needs to be like the first guy that they call. They're like, hey, I've got this game that's in prototype form. Oh, I guess, and he's gonna be like prototype form. Oh my goodness!
You have to make all the components. That's not a problem, is it? Oh no!
I can 3D print all of my components. I can make my own special game that nobody else can get, and I'll be the only one.
Yeah, I sadly understand it a little bit because I like to laminate and make my own player aids, even if the player aids are already good, just because I'm weird like that. But
okay,
I'm not as crazy as Andy.
Stopped that last sentence. I was totally with you. I was like, dude, awesome. Can I play with you? And you're like, even if the player aids are already good. Oh.
But don't worry.
Whenever I get a game to help help out with, usually they send me all these files. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this. Is this on Vassal? Cool. I'll meet you on Vassal.
Yeah.
Oh, dude.
I play.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I play mostly Vassal just because it's hard to get people to play the heavier games locally. Although I did find a group recently, thankfully, that I'm able to, and some of my family members will humor me. But no, I don't. Hands of the Sea had really good, nice, thick player aids. They weren't like paper, and so those I actually left fine. Or sometimes I'll actually laminate the player aid they send me. But a lot of ones, it's like the GMT, the old ones they used to, like the nice heavy cardstock paper. It's a nice heavy piece of paper, but it's, I don't know, something I like. Keep in mind, you pay a lot of good money for these games. It's like I want them to last a lifetime. So
yeah, no, I get it. Like I didn't know where to gauge it though. Like, is it because you're preserving the game? Because I get that now.
Yeah.
Like I was wondering because I once did a trade with a guy. It was one of the most, like, I really loved it. I think I maybe mentioned it on the GVU, but like the guy sent me he prefaced it with an email. It was like, I want you to know, I'm shrink wrapping the game, but it's not new. And I was like, okay, like this is a first for me. I've never got a chance to rip open the shrink wrap on a trade before. So this is a big moment. And then like I got to talking with him and it's like, yeah, I kind of learned about shrink wrapping and I started shrink wrapping just about everything in the house. My wife was not exactly entertained when I tried shrink wrapping her iPhone.
The couch.
That's funny.
Yeah, you get like a new toy. All I gotta do to shrink wrap something is this and
wrap it in plastic and take a blow dryer to it. Yeah.
No, yeah, it makes sense what you're saying though. Like you want to preserve the game, and I'm right there with you. Like, for especially I would say one of my biggest games that's like that right now is Iberian Rails, which I just can, I need to shut up about it, right? People are starting to get creeped out. They're starting to recommend therapy when I mention it. I get so into it, but it was such a, it was a small Kickstarter, and it's impossible to find now. It was never really picked up by anyone, and so like, I get it. Like they're like cardboard tokens, and how do you preserve like cardboard sheet? Like I can't really sleeve them. So do I, what do I do? You know, what do you do? Like, if a game has you using cardboard chits and you end up like shuffling and using them a lot, how do you preserve those tokens?
If you find an answer to that question, let me know, because my chits for Arkham Horror, the card game, are getting wrecked because they're playing that thing so much and drawing them out of a chaos bag.
Yeah, well, it's important that you can't like feel them, that they're different. It's like, ooh, I feel this one. That's the double 20. You know, that's
the fail. Let's not draw that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the group I found, they actually bought extra copies of an old 1983 Civil War game. It's really unique, and they bought extra copies because they were wearing out. They would play it over and over, and they were wearing out the chits because there is no way to stop it. They laminated the map because the map was wearing out. Yeah, and the problem is if you like heavier games like you guys do, and like a lot of people that I listen to, Punching Cardboard, Heavy Cardboard, those guys. Yeah, you know, a lot of these games are only going to get printed once or twice. And then they may never get printed again. And so it's like, you know, what are you going to do? So it takes my already kind of OCD nature about things I like and just kind of ramps it into overdrive. But
I'm determined through years of play with heavy games and stuff. I've decided, I've come to the realization that if someone breaks out a heavy game and it looks like crap, then it's been played a lot, and the person who's running the game is going to know it like the back of their hand. I get a little worried when a new copy of a game comes out and it's a heavy game. I'm like, ooh, you haven't played this very much, have you? Yeah. But the one that's tore up, it's tore all to hell, and that the person who owns that one has played the crap out of that and knows it like the back of his hand. I look forward to that copy.
Yeah. It is really cool to see a game that's been totally played like crazy. You
should see my copy of Rex. My copy of Rex is torn to pieces. The box hardly holds the component. The box is so beat up it hardly holds the game anymore. Yeah.
I once played a game of like it was a mass market game from the 80s, but the guy that I played it with had played it so much that he'd actually worn out the cards that came with it and had like made a whole separate deck of cards just by taking standard playing cards and then writing with a black marker the card effects on them. And so yeah,
my copy of Twilight Struggle, those cards are all tore up too. I've played that thing so much.
Oh, you could have sleeved that game, TC.
I could have. Why?
Sure. We do have Norm joining us in the chat, so we do. It's good to see you, Norm. Hey, Norm, maybe you'll answer us in the comments. Have you had a chance to play Hands in the Sea? And it sounds like Norm's playing Rex this week, and I think that he did that. He might have got that one off of your recommendation.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting because either Norm's going to talk to me a lot more or never talk to me again after playing Rex. It's either going to go one of two ways. There's no middle ground for Rex ever. There's no middle ground on that game at all.
How? Oh my goodness! Did I share the wrong thing? Because we ended up with another.
I messed up. I accidentally sent that to my sister-in-law who wanted to watch. I should have.
Oh. Okay. All right. No, you're good. You're good. I got a link for you right here if you want.
Oh, good, Norm. I hope it works for you, man.
sorry to Clara. No worries, man. That type of thing happens.
Okay.
Since we figured out about it, that's good because I always worry because I immediately I send out the link and then I go and start sharing it on the Longview page to make sure that people can come if they want to, and I'm always like, which one of these did I share? Am I going to end up like
some random stranger just watching us?
Panel talking about the game. Like, okay.
Joe, kick this guy off. Joe.
Sorry about that.
No worries. No worries.
Send me something real quick that I can just send.
On the if you look at the chat here on our group chat on the sidebar, I shared that little link there, which is clickable.
The YouTube one.
Yeah, u.tube, u2.be. Yeah, there you go. And I will I'm gonna go ahead and I removed her from the call, so I hope that she understands.
No, she's fine. That's actually, I apologize.
No worries, dude. And this will all TC, you're editing this part out, okay?
We're not. No, TC will use things against you. He will. You got it. Yeah. Said it's gonna be great.
No, your edit. That's gonna be gone. Okay. That's. But it's okay, Jonathan. It's not gonna be you. I'm not worried for you. I'm worried for me. If I did something like that, that's being cemented in the record books. That's going to happen, and it's going to be an episode of The Long View that everybody's going to know. It'd be anything, right, TC? It's like I'm paranoid now, man. It's actually getting me paranoid talking about it. I shared.
It's going to be great. You never know. It's going to be great. It'll give you a reason to listen. You'll be like, oh, what did he do? Oh.
I shared TC with you a little or the thing that we're going to be working off of here. I've got my little printouts. So thanks for creating this, Jonathan, and doing such a great job being so organized, because we definitely have a good agenda to work off of. So it sounds like Norm has not played Hands in the Sea, but he loves Dune and got a chance to play TI4, which I also played TI4. Me and TC were talking about that, Norm, and I liked it more than I had any business liking it. So don't tell anybody. All right. Well, Jonathan, TC, any questions before we get started?
I'm trying to go into this Google Drive to get this document, but apparently I need permission.
Oh, is that one of those things? I thought I shared the PDF. Shouldn't you just be able to click on that thing?
I am requesting access.
Oh, I'm sorry, man. I thought you could just click on that thing and it'd be all downloaded, and because I downloaded it to my hard drive and that's what I use. So my bad, dude.
Oh, no worries. As long as you got a copy, I can fly by the seat of my pants like I always do. No big.
And you've played A Few Acres of Snow, right, TC?
Oh, me and Carissa played the crap out of that game. We love it.
All right. So just to know, because it's not the same, but it's at least a little bit of a frame of reference. So
yeah, it definitely is. In fact, I actually have probably played it less than all. Definitely played it less than all y'all have. So you guys actually know more about that game than I do.
Well, I haven't played it a ton, though. I mean, if you've played it, that's good, because we're not here to talk about it, but just the fact that you've played it is going to be helpful to the discussion. So, and I think that's the game that basically birthed the Long View. So
I think
it was
is.
like
I was reading that. It started off a long discussion with Jeff. I remember seeing that when I discovered the podcast. I went and looked at the about. Yeah, I saw that. That was pretty cool.
I think Jeff and Joel, Eddie. I think that's the way it all went down.
From drive-through, yeah.
Yep. Good old Joe. Well, guys, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. I'm here to host this episode together with my buddy out in Portland, TC Reed. My name's Joe Sallin. TC, how are you doing today?
Doing great. And we actually got snow up here now. I had to survive a little bit of snow. It's all gone now, but hey.
The snow is still here, and we were surprised today by the exact opposite thing, TC. We were surprised that the snow was melting this quickly.
Oh, the sun came out.
Central Iowa. Well, our guest comes from down in warm weather country where snow shuts all the schools down and makes everybody think that it's becoming, like that one movie. What was that crappy movie with I forget.
I can name a lot of crappy movies. You gotta narrow it down.
It was a crappy movie where they actually had the weather was chasing people around, the cold was following people through the New York Manhattan Library. It was The Day After Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Day After Tomorrow. And it had who did it have in it? I have his face in my head. But anyway.
Mr. Quaid.
Yeah,
yes,
Quaid.
It did.
Quaid.
Yeah.
Dennis Quaid, that's right.
It had the big boat floating down the middle of New York with the CGI wolves. Ruff, 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 ruff. Oh, yeah. That's a great movie. And they burned books in the library to keep warm. We can talk about this movie instead of Hands in the Sea.
Oh, wait. TC, yes, we know what you're good for, TC. Apparently, if TC knows the movie, just don't see it. It's probably like the game Deadly Premonition. It's probably something that's so bad that it's good. So if you're into that, go see it by all means. But yeah, if TC has word for word, scene by scene knowledge of a movie, I'd become immediately skeptic. So anyhow,
at least it says they go with the board games.
Yes, TC. So I'm just going to get right to it. We got Jonathan joining us in his Longview debut, and we're going to be talking about one of his favorite games, Hands in the Sea. So, Jonathan, welcome.
Hey, guys. Thanks. Just wanted to say, too, really appreciate you guys letting me come on here and talk about this game that I love. It's just really cool that you guys let kind of average Joe gamers come on and talk about these things, which is something I just love about the hobby.
I can tell that you love the hobby, Jonathan, but I'm going to call you out for a second because you're calling yourself an average Joe gamer, and you, sir, have submitted you did a briefing for what we're going to be going over in this episode. Like, this guy could write, like, you could write, basically, you could defend this as though it were a thesis, I'm thinking. Like, this, you know, he knows way more. You're trying to lower everybody's expectations so that way they're all going to be like, oh, my God, he's a genius. I get it, man. I've seen people like you before. I know it. Jonathan, the fact that this is your first time on, I'm so excited that we can be your first foray into board game podcast media. And I just, you know, by seeing how well collected your thoughts have been, I'm excited for this episode. It's one that the game interests me, and your approach to it looks so thorough and something that I'm really on the edge of my seat waiting to hear you talking about this awesome game.
Well, I appreciate it. I was trying to lower expectations so I could over-deliver. I feel like that has not been wrecked. So.
Well, you know, we're all about the common man on,
yeah.
the little man. We're all about the little common man on. So we welcome your little presence on our podcast. You're welcome. You're welcome.
That's why I got TC on here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now you got to hit me back with it, TC. Otherwise, I look like a mean person. Or you can just leave me hanging there. That's cool. That's cool.
I'll leave you hanging. That's cool.
No, Jonathan, the passion that you come to the hobby with is to me really indicative of just, you know, the heavier side of the hobby. When you get into it, it's like becomes just a part of your identity. And I can just sense that, like, you know, this is something that's you know, it's an inspiring way to really analyze, and you're appreciating this game on a level that to me is refreshing to see. As a host, just this is exactly what the Longview was made. And, you know, to give a little bit of history to those that are unfamiliar, the Longview started with an episode that was about sort of the mother game of, or I want to say mother game, but a game that inspired the game we're talking about. So A Few Acres of Snow actually inspired Hands in the Sea, a two-player deck building war game. You know, there's just a lot of things. I don't want to take too much of the explanation, the introduction you're going to give, Jonathan, but I mean, in a way, like, that was the first episode of the Longview, and it got started on a really high note by a very informed discussion, and I think that that's the direction I see this one heading. So, sir, I'm already impressed at this point. So you're gonna have to over deliver unless you want to disappoint me. So
I don't want to do that. That's for sure. No.
I don't think you can, dude. All you got to do is just read this. Really, I'm just kidding. So we're gonna go ahead and kick off the Hands in the Sea discussion with a brief overview of the game. Jonathan, take it away.
Yeah. So I guess I'll kind of do this for people who have not played A Few Acres of Snow. If you don't have any experience with that,
we don't talk about broken games on the podcast.
That's the whole point of the podcast was that question. No, Jonathan. Yes, please go on.
Okay, so basically, this is the first Punic War. It's kind of an underserved part of the wargaming hobby. It set the stage for the second and then eventually third Punic War. It's what saw Rome go from being a regional power to basically a superpower through the course of these three wars. A lot of people know about Hannibal crossing the Alps, fighting with the Romans, and just this massive epic clash. This is the prelude to that. This is Hannibal's father. He's one of the major generals for this conflict, and you see some of the early signs of Rome's greatness throughout this whole conflict. Because they're basically a land superpower, or not a landing superpower. They're a land power. They've got good martial prowess. They've basically conquered most of the Italian peninsula, and they have just crossed into Sicily and are running into conflicts with Carthage, who is a Mediterranean superpower, very much a merchant power, has a great navy, powerful mercenary armies, and they're very asymmetric, and the game bears that out as well. Very similar to how it is in A Few Acres of Snow, but basically, if you haven't played A Few Acres of Snow, what this is about, it's a deck building game. That's how it works. There is no dudes on a map. There is no like characters you're moving around on a board. And so what happens is you basically start out with a few. It's point to point with sea zones that are interdicting your regions. You have Africa, you have Sicily, which is like the crown jewel of the Mediterranean, based on its geography as well as the plentiful supplies of crops and things like that. Ability to have ports for your navy.
Yeah, very key in that area.
very key as it has been, for millennia. It would be in World War I and II and things like that as well. So you've got Sicily, which is the crown jewel, that's in the middle. You've got the Italian peninsula, which is Rome's homeland. So there already you've got Rome and Carthage kind of in diagonal corners of the map. Sicily's in the middle, and then off in the northwest is the kind of underdeveloped, rough terrain of Corsica and Sardinia. Not as critical, but they definitely, you don't want to overlook them completely. And so what you start out with is a very raw deck of just 10 locations and a military unit for the Roman side, your legion, and a merchant for the Carthaginians. And you will basically take 2 actions at a time every time you go, and then it passes back and forth. And then every time the Carthaginian exhausts his deck, unlike in A Few Acres, you will be basically resolving some things, and it's like a turn sequence. It's something that's not at all there in A Few Acres. And that will bring in some output randomness will come in there, because it's going to do something that's going to shake up the game. Sometimes very little, sometimes not at all, sometimes very big. But
sure.
But the cool thing is you start out with this empire. You have a few nice cities, kind of your top cities that have things like boats and local troops that can be supplied, as well as money and income. That's all very similar to A Few Acres. But you have basically no military buildup at that point, and you then start to take action. So some of the actions you'll do is you'll settle locations, you'll develop locations, and you'll do this all through the cards, which will have locations and transport mechanisms on it, which is, if you know A Few Acres, is exactly the same there.
Sure, yeah.
You'll do aggressive actions, you'll do attacks, you'll try to do raids with your cavalry. You will try to engage each other's fleets. There is bribery in the game. It much more affects Carthage than it does Rome. Just because of the fact that Rome has basically only loyal soldiers for the most part, mostly citizenry. They didn't even have professional legions at this point. This is all before the Marian reforms. So these are all citizen soldiers. The only people who weren't Roman citizens were your allied levies that you had, and even those were fairly loyal due to how generous Rome was to their allies. And later on, that would be why Hannibal had such a hard time getting people to flip when he was in the Second Punic War. Even though he was dominating Rome and winning battle after battle, people didn't want to flip. Yeah, it didn't matter. People, he literally only got one major city to flip, but that's kind of besides the point. But an interesting.
No, I need to go grab a bowl of popcorn, because I want this to keep going. I'm so interested in the story. Keep going, man. Yeah,
that's a great history. I love this stuff.
I'm taking
no. Keep doing this. I'm very interested in the history behind it. This is an interesting thing that I think that as somebody who's played the game a lot, you are very informed about the inner workings of this conflict, and also it sounds like it interested you to maybe do some more research. So I'm really engaged.
Yeah, this is one of the first books I ever read on any warfare was Adrian Goldsworthy, who's this great British scholar, and he wrote the first Punic Wars, and he's written some other books. He wrote the Punic Wars, and it's all about combat. Looks at how their sides were. Talks about the mindset that they had. Some really underappreciated things about the conflict, and how it was really.
Everybody knows about Hannibal crossing the Alps. Nobody knows about when Rome actually rose to power.
Yep, and this is basically the conflict. The third one was basically a fait accompli due to how much Carthage had been. They had to sue for peace in both the first and second. Spoiler alert, I guess. For peace on pretty bad terms, and they went from they were the superpower. That's the thing. Rome was the upstart. Hands in the seat comes from the fact that Rome and Carthage had been allied on and off for a period of about 100 years, and Carthage had often helped them because they were keeping down the Greeks, who also had colonies on southern Italy. And at one point, Messana reaches out for help, and they don't want Carthaginians garrison. Messana is this small town on the upper northeast side of Sicily. Carthage has basically the run of the show on all the western side of Sicily, and Rome doesn't even have a navy at this point. And Rome, after a very contentious debate, decides to vote to go ahead and send support to Messana, and Carthage gets their garrison ejected, and they're almost shocked. They're like, "What is Rome doing? Here's a country with no navy." And they said, if Rome even wanted, they're not even going to wash their hands in the sea. That's where that saying comes from. Is that's how much they're dominant. And by the end of this first Punic War, Rome ends up basically telling them, you're going to have a fleet of a few dozen ships, and you're going to pay us these, basically it sees Rome go from this regional power, and Carthage is truly the superpower. They're the ones with ports everywhere. They're the ones whose goods are flowing across the entire Mediterranean Sea. They're the ones who run the show. They're a mercenary superpower, though, more than a military superpower. And all of a sudden, by the end of this, you're seeing Rome has learned very quickly how to dominate, not just on land now, but on the ocean. And so it's really a fascinating conflict that you should read about. A lot of people don't know that this is kind of the struggle that propelled Rome. It's what made Rome into what it was, because before then it had kind of been a republic. It starts to almost become an empire. You start to see those makings of it because they get taken to the brink. Rome, in the Second Punic War, they lose a third of their entire Senate in the Battle of Cannae, when Hannibal just slaughters about 80,000 Romans. A battle that killed so many men in one day, it wasn't even exceeded until the Battle of the Somme in World War I.
Wow, in World War I. Holy crap.
It takes until World War I until that many men are killed in a day.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's more than Antietam. That's a lot.
So it's insane. And the fact is, when they go to Rome to ask for peace, this just shows the mindset. And I'll talk about the mindset of Rome when they went to go in peace in the Second Punic War. He says they basically say, no, we're not going to accept peace unless you basically leave and we go back to the way things were before. They're not prepared to give any concessions. Whereas Hannibal and the whole Carthaginian mindset was like the Greek mindset before, is you fight, one side gains the advantage, they show they're the superior, you give some concessions, you give some land, you give some cities, you pay some indemnities, things like that. And Rome's was basically, we will win or we will die trying. And that was always their mindset. And it's pretty fascinating to read about this and what other civilization could come back from losing a third of their ruling body, in a battle and losing 80,000 men back when populations weren't nearly as large.
Sure. 80,000 back in that day was a ton.
Yeah, it's not a joke.
Yeah, that's like you said, a third of their governing body.
You are making me want to break out my copy of Sword of Rome right now.
Well, what I loved about it, for me,
the game.
The takeaway for me is that I love that phrase. So for me, like, a lot of the historical war games have the coolest titles, and they've got a story behind them. And I think that's true with A Few Acres of Snow. The way that that's the reference to Canada. Well, here, that Hands in the Sea, that reference to sort of showing an attitude, like a statement that just portrays the attitude of the conflict, to me is very engaging. And that's, to me, just the title itself. I wish that all games were able to do that thing that war games can do. Like, there's just so much passion involved in those sorts of conflicts, and it gets a little bit more than the castles of Burgundy and, like generic European city/region name. But, those games are my bread and butter, don't get me wrong. But, like, I just love the story behind it as well. So where were we? Were we in the...
We're still on what you can do for your actions, but yeah, definitely.
Oh no! I was just like, are we like? So the Punic War here, the first Punic War is the stage that's set, and we're talking about, like, essentially, if we wanted to think maybe modern day, like, think like post World War I, you've got essentially your major powers, that have just fought, and then this is that first conflict where you really start to see, and maybe World War I isn't the best example, but maybe it's that first conflict where you start to see, maybe it's more like what Napoleon was, where you start to see, like, the first modernized, what a modern city, what a modern civilization could do, when a republic could turn all of its people into essentially helping this war effort. So maybe that's kind of an ancient parallel.
No, that's definitely one thing you see for sure, because in this first war, it's very much like a training worlds world at war type of thing of like, whereas World War I, there was still an epic scale, but kind of like you said, with Napoleon, because in these first conflicts in the first Punic War, you never see more than about 15 to 20,000 soldiers on either side. The naval battles were truly epic. You see some of the largest naval battles ever. That doesn't really happen in the Second Punic War because Carthage, they have to basically give up most of their fleet. as part of their terms. They have to. There's a lot of basically, they kind of get whipped into submission in that respect. But you start seeing massive armies of over 50,000 soldiers on both sides, and that's on the on what the professional estimates. They of course say more, like Polybius and some of these other guys will say it's more, but based on what they know, it's probably around, like I said, about 15 to 20,000 per army is what you're seeing in this first war. And like you said, both sides kind of start to realize that they're no longer. Both sides up to this point had always kind of fought people who were smaller and that they could beat up on, and all of a sudden they're like, "Well, this is different. This is almost like an arch nemesis. This is who we're going to have to step up our game to defeat."
Sure.
And Rome seems to come to that realization earlier, and they also seem to they just learn that game better. They learn that they're going to have to dedicate everything they have to winning this war, whereas Carthage is always almost kind of like a corporate state where they want land and they want territory and they want to win battles, but what they really want is to be a trading power. They want to settle colonies.
They're worried about the bottom line, whereas Rome is defending their own identity.
Yep, Rome's identity is in the glory and sanctity of Rome, and in never giving up. And so you see kind of like this mercenary type attitude almost of like, well, okay, but what's in it for me, dollars and cents wise? And that's granted, that's why Carthage was the richest. They had the ability to collect tariffs and duties through all the trading posts that they had, and they were the supreme naval power. But what you see is Rome basically coming in and the superiority, not on a moral sense, but the superiority of that ideology is gonna win. And they're
whatever it takes, basically.
Yep. Yeah,
whatever it takes versus like a war that's almost being decided by committee over in Carthage.
Yep. Yeah, and in fact, if you really want some cool stuff in the Punic Wars, he talks about the difference between the Roman Senate and the Carthaginian Senate. And just kind of the summary is the Carthaginian Senate constantly was bickering and not wanting anyone to get too much power or be any general to become too famous. They didn't want that. Whereas Rome, while they had very hard, heated debates, in the end, once a decision was made, everyone was on board. And
you supported each other. It was
the political system of Rome was certainly superior when it came especially to war making. Rome was just superior, and their mindset was superior. But anyway, so kind of digress there. But it's honestly the most fascinating conflict outside of probably the two world wars.
Sure, yeah.
Just the way these two they're so close to each other, and yet their attitudes are so different. Their attitudes towards how you fight, their attitudes towards what war even looks like, what it means. Like you said, their identities are completely different. And you see how they mold and get shaped. And one of the fascinating things is that Hannibal literally became a boogeyman. Kids, when they would want their kids to go to bed at night, Romans, even into like the 2nd century AD, there's writers talking about telling their kids, like, don't go out in the street at night or Hannibal will come and get you. Like, he was that much of I can't even comprehend anything like that in America. Like, we have ghost stories or monsters or things like that, but it'd almost be like, like the ghost of Cornwallis is going to come and get you. Like, if you don't come back here, and he almost destroyed us, like 250 years ago. Like, pretty incredible. We're not worried about that, but it was, that's crazy. So the way that this conflict that we've got a great historical background for which the game is going to sort of unfold this story. One player takes control of Carthage, right? Yep. Correct.
And then the other player controls Rome, and you've already gone a little bit into like how those actions and stuff are played. So for folks that have never played A Few Acres of Snow, is there any like major? I mean, you've got deck building here, right?
Yep. Yes. So you start out. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go, sir.
You start just with 12 cards, each of you. Carthage has a campaign card that's always at the bottom. That's when they signal the end of their turn. But basically, you start out with locations. Now, those locations will have money. Some of them will have colonists if it's a populous area. And they'll usually have some location that allows you to get there, represents like that city's contribution to your republic or your empire. And then they'll have some type of economic activity. And we can kind of talk about later how they're already asymmetric. There's not rules making Rome and Carthage different, but their initial deck setup is different. It's not super obvious at first, but that's one of the beauties of this game is as you peel away, you start to realize, oh, as Carthage, I'm incentivized to play certain. I can do different things, but there's certain aspects, certain strengths I have, such as my navy at the beginning, that I need to utilize. If I just ignore that and don't use that early advantage, because this starts right after they've kicked the Carthaginians out of Messana. Rome has that. They haven't even taken Syracuse. You had better utilize that jumpstart you have, because Rome has a powerful legion right at the beginning with their locations, and immediately there is nothing that's like preset. Like, yes, you want to start settling and colonizing some of those neutral locations because you have to fight for them. But you also have to balance that between, okay, what kind of cards am I going to draft? How am I going to decide between settling this location versus this city could provide me colonists to settle, but say Carthage is also a really wealthy trading city. It's worth 4 silver pieces. So if I do that, now I can recruit cavalry, which I'm going to want to be able to try to raid my enemy as well as prevent them raiding me. And so immediately you have 1,000 ways you can try to tinker. Do you go like for a settlement blitz as fast as you can and not really build up your deck? Or do you try to get a lot of units into your army? Do you go heavier on things like trading and building up your administration? There's a lot of angles to take. And honestly, I continue to tinker and tweak. I played 16 games now in the last year.
Wow.
And most of them online, but and honestly, it's like every time I think like this card's not that good or this strategy card's not great, all of a sudden someone uses it, or I even just try it just to try it. And I'm like, wow, that was actually, I didn't realize it, but that was actually really strong. Or sometimes a strategy I think is like really good, and then I come into a game against another opponent and he just wrecks me. He's like, oh. Like, you know, because that's one of the things when people say something's imbalanced. I'm like, okay, well, why don't you try that against somebody who's different? Because you kind of, when you play with, what I like about playing people online is you get these vastly different
opponents, right?
Yeah, opponents. And I play people from all over the world. And it's like when I play in my own game group, everyone can kind of fall into that rut, right? The meta game of like, oh, this strategy is really, really good, and this card sucks. And so kind of everyone just ignores it, right? And that can happen in Euros too. It's like, in Puerto Rico, oh, this building sucks. Like, no one should use it. And so you know, every time you have a different game, you kind of see it where it's like, everyone kind of falls into this hive mind of like, okay, these are like the 3 or 4 things you can do. But when you play online, it's like, I was playing against this guy from Spain, and he used some cards I had never even, that I thought were like, okay, I could kind of see what I'd be used. And he used them liberally and just, I mean, he auto victoried me in like turn 6. I was like, holy crap.
Ooh. So victory, let's outline what are you actually shooting for in this game?
So what you're shooting for is to have the most victory points or to win through an auto victory condition. That basically can happen one of 2 ways. Either you conquer someone's capital, which I've never had happen, and I've never come that close. Historically, very difficult, and there is no Halifax hammer in here. We'll talk about that later, but that's not here. The other way to do it is you either run out of town cubes or city discs, or you win enough battles where that triggers the end of the game. There's also a chance that an event card will come out called They Make Peace. Both sides come to the peace table. That can only happen in turn 9 or after, and there's only 12 turns in the game. The game can also sometimes finish on just 12 turns, count up victory points. But the difference also between A Few Acres of Snow and this, A Few Acres of Snow, you count your victory points at the end, or like if you get your auto victory by conquering, I think it's a New York versus Quebec. New York or Boston or Quebec in A Few Acres. Whereas on here, you have to you finish every round and you score points. So that's a big difference.
Yes.
And you will gather more points throughout the game than you will at the end.
So it's not just about holding on to it, grabbing turf and holding it for dear life until the end. It's like you can have some expanding and contracting and still get rewards for it.
Correct. Absolutely.
Cool.
Yep. And there's basically at the end, one of the other things I really like about it, and again, all I can really compare it to is A Few Acres Snow, because honestly, there's no other game that's anything like this.
Sure.
Other than A Few Acres. And is when you can kind of like develop cities, for instance, and you get double your points in A Few Acres of Snow. That's only worth 1 point for you at the end of the game in this. And you can only develop the most populous cities or the ones that had the chance to grow. They have to have a little colonist symbol on them. And it's only like a half dozen on each side that you're likely going to get. And so you're looking at probably in a game that's going to end up in the, getting close to probably 100 points. It's all said and done. It's not going to be worth a ton. There's a lot of small edges that you're looking for in this game. There's no like, oh, I'm just going to build a crap ton of cities because I'm the British and I have more of those colonists. It's not
people, so many people.
Yep. Because as Carthage, you're going to start out with more money. You're going to start out with more boats. You're going to start out with the merchant already in your hand. And you're going to have a little bit better position, and you're going to have a navy. Rome has a ton of colonist cards, though, representing their insane manpower base. That's one of the things we'll talk about later. Asymmetry, I'm kind of getting off track, but suffice it to say, there is just a ton of actions for you to do. I think there's literally, I'm looking at the little player aid off to the side here. There's like 23 actions you can do each time. You can only take 2 at a time, which is it's great that you can only take 2 actions at a time because it helps kind of narrow down your focus a little bit rather than trying to do a million things like when you're playing a big war game or even just a big Euro. You can only do 2 actions at a time. At the same time, it also gives you major angst because when you're looking at this, you're like, man, I really want to draft this troop. I need to get cavalry because he has cavalry. Okay, but I also really want to recruit the magistrate to help make my empire a little more efficient. But I also really want to, develop this city. But I also need to build a navy because he's starting to pillage me. Like, you want to do everything, right? Like, there's everything has at least some value. There's 15 things you can do on every single time it's your turn. It's like, but you only get to do 2, and then your opponent goes. So what do you do? I'm just going to bring back, Jeff Gamble, the previous host of the Longview, has said, I think on the Longview, and I know that he said it to me in my interactions with him, that like that 2 actions is just really a sweet spot for games. Like I think Martin Wallace really kind of, is one of the first examples of, if you do only 1 action, then it's like everything becomes very reactive, right? Because it's like, I do this. Okay, well, I'm going to do this to counter you did this. And it becomes like that sort of, tit for tat. And I think that with 2 actions, it gives you impact, the ability to do something, but not the ability to get so far ahead. It's not like, one of my favorite games, Hansa Teutonica, you start with 2 actions, but then, you end that game with like 3, 4, 5 actions. And it's like, you can have so much impact on your turn that other players just can't do anything about. It really becomes very different. Like it changes the game as it goes on. And that's a core part of the mechanism there. But I like the way that, Martin Wallace realized that you need some impact, but you can't just give them all of the tools and let them make all of the decisions and really change the entire flow of the game. So out of 23 actions, only getting to do 2 sounds like tough choices. It honestly makes it a good game. I love to play it live because you get a better flow. That's but one thing about when you do play by email, it's nice because I feel bad sometimes playing live because it's like I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, I want to do this. And then you also don't know what's in your opponent's hand because you each have a hand of, I guess, whatever that part is, you're always going to have a hand of 5 cards. And it's similar to a lot of deck building games. Every time you finish your actions, you're going to draw back up to that limit. And it's like, I don't know what's in his hand. Like, I know what he's been, what he's been seeding his deck with. I know if he's been building up his naval capabilities, if he's just doing things to be a better, drive up his economic engine, if he's building, more cavalry, more heavy infantry, more light infantry. I know all of that, but I don't know when it's coming back in. And so while there's almost no randomness in the game, that's another thing we'll talk about a little bit later, the fact that you have that much hidden information of what's in this guy's hand, guy or girl, and it's like, okay, I have no idea what he can do. And sometimes it's like you're just, your hands are almost sweating of like, I want to make this move. I could make a great move and I could come in here and say, even though there's only 2 actions, I could, for instance, raid this city or raid this settlement and then come in and settle it right on top of him. But if he's ready for me and he has the cards ready, he blocks me. Now I don't have my cavalry and now he can counter me. It's like,
there's like you're opening up the door in a way so you can go through it, but that door is cracked open a little bit for an entire opponent turn. Yeah. Ooh, tension, man. You're selling me on tension here, Jonathan.
Yeah, and you can set people up and kind of say like, oh, I'm going to build this here. And it's like, wait a minute. Well, you don't have any cavalry yet. It's like, okay, but you did draft that light infantry that can block. They can't raid themselves, they can block. It's like, do you really have that light infantry already back in your hand? Like you just recycled your deck. It's like you can do a lot of bluffing in this game, and you can also there's a lot of that going on because there's so many possibilities of what that guy could be holding, and you don't know. And like I said, it can swing quickly. This game, the fortunes can swing very quickly. Which, if again, one thing about this war, both sides see their navies wiped out 3 times, mostly due to storms, but also due sometimes to just how badly they got drubbed in naval combat. The land battles were not quite as gruesome, mainly just because they weren't as large, mostly 10 to 15,000 troops on each side. But you're going to see some big swings in this game. But it's not crazy in like, oh, this is just a bunch of dice doing this to me. It's when you win a battle or when you pull off a successful raid, it's a big deal. And it should be because, every inch of the ground is precious because it's scoring points for you every turn at the end of every campaign phase when you go through the campaign. And so it's very important. And there's never a time when you can feel like, oh, I've got this inevitability on my side of like I've got my economic engine going now, and I've got maybe a superior military, so I can just kind of continue to coast. It's never that way.
You never feel like the tides are entirely going in your favor. It's always it's not like this sort of balanced on a fence post and then it's over. I see it going this way. It's like there's a lot more. There's some. It sounds like there's some things behind the curtain and some things that are out there in front of the curtain, like. When you've got access to this sort of a range of abilities, and like you've mentioned, like having tried them out, you're finding that each one is offering you more and more dimensions that you didn't think were feasible, or maybe you wrote them off as being that didn't seem like a good idea. But as you keep playing, you keep discovering like the uses for the things in the game. That's a really cool thing that that it has that ability to keep entertaining you, and there's more doors for you to open. Even after you've become a very experienced player.
Yep.
You've mentioned like land combat and sea combat and the importance of that sea combat. We're going to use like a few acres of snow here, and I would highly recommend anybody who's not checked it out yet, check out the first episode of the Long View on a few acres of snow. It's a really awesome piece of board game tabletop media. But we're going to kind of reference a few acres of snow here to use it as a bit of a comparison. It won't be the only thing that we do here, but I definitely think that that's warranted in this example because, a few acres of snow is kind of like that. I almost feel like it's the first edition. Like, I don't know. Martin Wallace is just, in my opinion, a visionary. And a lot of times, some of his designs are so unique that they end up with what many people would consider a flaw. And you've already referenced once and alluded to the Halifax hammer. Now, I'd like you, if you wouldn't mind, Jonathan, to talk about what the Halifax hammer is and whether or not you feel that Hands in the Sea has that and why it, if not, what does it do to fix it? So anyway, you, sir.
Yeah, I don't know a few acres as well as like maybe say TC does. TC's played it a lot. But it's basically the idea that because your sieges are unlimited and because there is no finite end to combat, it goes back and forth until one side wins, you basically have this unstoppable route to pursue. And in the end of the day, your superior troops and your superior cards, there's no way to get around it because there is no like output randomness or even input randomness going on. You can basically take this avenue through Halifax to get to
Quebec eventually. Yeah,
you get to the Canadian capital.
Yeah, you go through Halifax to get to Quebec, I think, but you really, really have to like whittle your deck down to be able to pull it off.
Yeah, but because there is basically no output randomness that will ever affect you, unlike we'll talk about here, it's something that is a problem, and I've seen people do it. Again, I've not played a few acres to know, like just how maybe there is like a way, but I've not seen a lot of people who played it a lot who are like, yeah, you can definitely counter it. So, kind of the reason why the Halifax hammer is not an issue in this game is a couple of reasons. I'm just kind of jumping through my notes here. One of the things is, first of all, is in order to even get to the capital that either side has, or even just to get to their mainland, you have the sea zones where you don't have to worry about that. The navies aren't really involved other than a little bit of piracy and using ships to reinforce coastal regions and a few acres. Here, navies are very integral because both of your sides have their initial supply points. They have one each on their mainlands, Italy and North Africa, and then you each have one on each side of Sicily. Lilybaeum on the west side for Carthage, and then Rome will quickly see Syracuse on the east side. The problem is, if you want to get to the other guy's mainland, you have to not only hold that sea open to allow you to basically trace your supply, because you have to trace supply up from only one of 4 supply points in the game. Either Carthage, the capital, Lilybaeum on the west side of Sicily, east side Syracuse, and then Roma on the Italian peninsula. And so if you want to land there, if at any point your enemy is able to take back that sea zone, because there's a sea zone for each of these. There's a sea zone outside of Africa. There's a sea zone for Sicily. There's a sea zone for Corsica, Sardinia, and there's a sea zone for the Italian peninsula. You are now going to be completely cut off. You cannot reinforce. You can't do anything because it's like your navy.
Wow. I'm sorry to stop you, Jonathan, but like I just had kind of a bit of an epiphany, and I think that you've alluded to this, but just for any other viewer who has the lower IQ like myself, I'd like to just say that A Few Acres of Snow was very widely applauded for the way that it used this sort of deck building, like you mentioned, sort of supply lines to represent that you have to work with the rugged terrain, the difficulty of maintaining an army to be able to get somewhere. However, there was no real needing to feed armies. There was no real needing to sort of maintain a siege. It was almost like you could just get there and then just, like you said before, infinitely camp out. Now, what you're saying here almost makes me think like A Few Acres of Snow, which was applauded for showing like the 1700s Canada warfare, in a hostile environment. Here you're talking about where it is ancient. It's ancient world, and so there's only these you're not moving a large amount of people just on a dime. People don't listen like that. Like these are city states, and they don't leave their city. So you're basically tied to these specific city states and must continue to trace a supply line. That's something that I thought was really, really cool. So thanks for sort of like enumerating that and allowing at least me to sort of see a bit of a parallel there. So cool. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Take off right from there.
No worries. No, it's the supply conditions of this game are definitely what helps drive it, and it was so true. It's why Sicily was so important. It's why they eventually came to blows over Sicily. It's why the Greeks fought the Carthaginians for over a century before Rome eventually started tangling with Carthaginians. At this time, like you said, it's extremely difficult to transport stuff over land. That's one thing I didn't like about A Few Acres is the fact that you could infinitely continue these campaigns. These siege campaigns, it's like that's a tough thing to do, especially when winter comes. You can read about George Washington served in the French Indian War, and talked about basically a lot of times you have to just pack up and go home, or pack up and go into winter quarters at wintertime. You can't just keep sitting here.
Yeah, the whole story, the epic story of wintering at Valley Forge.
Valley Forge, yeah.
Yeah, Pigeon Forge would be where Dolly Parton winters. Sorry, anyway.
Like you said, it's Martin Wallace. Certainly he's a visionary, and without his game, Hands of the Sea wouldn't have been that, because Dan Berger talks about the fact that he was trying to make like a CDG, which there's been a lot of, and CDGs are amazing. I love them. It's my most favorite war game genre just by like collection portion. But this game does a lot of things with a low rules overhead that simulates this, and one of those things is supply line. Super simple rules. Here's your 4 ultimate sources of supply. You can trace through your connections as long as they're not controlled by your enemy. And if you have control of the seas, you can also trace through the sea. That can be changed very quickly. A storm wrecks your navy, boom. Now all of a sudden, if that enemy even has one ship there and you have nothing because your navy got blown away, or even they just defeated you in combat and you had to retreat, now you've been cut off. If you don't have an overland supply route to that location, those cards are dead in your hand. You can't reinforce it in battle. And that might sound drastic, but that's how it has to be. It would be completely unrealistic to have it any other way. That's why the Carthage eventually had to give up, is after the Battle of Aegean Islands. They finally got completely shellacked at about their last kind of ditch effort. After having a couple of nice wins against Rome, they get just absolutely shellacked, and they can no longer reinforce Lilybaeum and a couple of the other key towns on the western side of Sicily. And it's like they had to give up at that point. You can't fight if you can't maintain your supply lines. And that's one thing that, eventually I moved on from a lot of the early other war games that came out in some of the 80s and 90s, the more Ameritrash, is supply lines weren't even existent there. And it's like, it's all about supply. Honestly, it sounds kind of weird. And it doesn't, it's not going to, the great generals, people think about all the wonderful, brilliant maneuvers and things like that. But supply is so crucial because
you have to be able to sustain the siege. That's really tough. It's interesting because it brings back what you mentioned earlier, like World War I, and how they had to, they would plan for like months for a single siege. They literally would build like 5 different rail lines getting into this one town in eastern France, and just for essentially what was planning to be like a week or 2 long offensive, if that.
Yep. No, absolutely. And so I love the supply aspect of this game. It makes it extremely difficult to ever go for any type of hammer route, to just try to say, I'm going to go drive with my great army on their capital and just finish this thing. Or even I'm just going to go drive on the critical city like Utica, or say for the Carthage, or say I'm going to go try to drive on, Thurii, or one of those other, get like even a foothold on the peninsula.
Is Syracuse an important one in this one, or?
No, Syracuse is an Eastern Supply. Eastern Supply City is one of the few cities that was big enough that could actually hold significant grain stores. Same with Ilibaima on the west side. And so it works out perfectly in that if your navy gets shellacked, you can still maintain a hold in Sicily, because as long as you hold one of those 2 cities. Again, you need to make sure you don't get cut off on land. But if at any point you do get cut off on land, if your navy isn't there to keep the sea lanes at least neutral, because you can either be neutral if both of you have a navy there, you don't have to fight each other, or you can have it be controlled by one side or the other if it's just that person's navy there. And so,
whoa, you're telling me that these navy, and I guess it would make sense because these sea lines could be huge and very difficult difficult to defend an entire sea region. I mean, we're not talking here about rivers. We're talking about entire sea regions. But you are literally allowed to in this game. I mean, sea combat's an element, which is kind of where I'm looking to go with this. But you can actually peacefully coexist.
Yep, you can coexist in the same region. And that often happens. A lot of times these fleets, just because you don't have modern communication, you don't have any type of radar, you don't have balloons going overhead. You could have multiple years where both sides had a navy of hundreds of ships, and they didn't clash. Sometimes you didn't want to. Sometimes you might have felt like you weren't up to snuff. You were still trying to train. Especially think about it. Rome at one point loses 300 ships in a massive storm, almost every single one, because of their Corvus invention. Knocked the Carthaginians around flat in the sea. Problem was, it also made their vessels not very seaworthy, and they also weren't that great as sailors to begin with. So they lose 300 ships in a single storm. Your whole navy gets wiped out. Now think about it. Now you have to train all these rowers again. You have to train your Marines. You have to train your archers. It's like, that is insane. Again, talking about the difference between an ancient, modern, think about any modern navy of we just lost our entire 7th Fleet out by Korea. It's like, everyone would just be like, all right, we're packing up and going home. We'd all have shell shock. Back then, they were just like, okay, well, I guess we're going to do it again, and maybe we'll get rid of the Corvus because it's kind of crazy. So yes, your navies can exist, and what happens is it almost becomes kind of a Cold War sometimes in the Navy, where both sides are like, okay, do I want to launch this attack? If I win, I will now have complete free to use pillaging, because you cannot pillage your opponent's coastal cities unless you have, if their navy's there. So you can protect yourself. And you really want to be able to pillage because it gives you income, it takes income from them, and it reduces their victory points. Sure. But again, if you lose, it's like there's huge stakes. If you lose, you're going to be driven back, and now they're going to have free reign on you. And so it's like, well, do we just sit here and kind of just keep building up our forces? Do I go somewhere else and try to be where they're not? You can always do that. You could say, okay, I'm going to go up over here to raid him in Italy, and I'll let him raid me in Sicily. There's a lot of ways you can play the Navy game. And of course, always lurking in your mind is of the 15 events in the game, there's 3 of them that deal with naval disasters or storms at sea of varying degrees of severity.
Any of them that wipes out the entirety of the Roman fleet?
There's one that wipes out, and it's biased towards Rome, as it historically was. And so they have a 2/3 chance of getting wiped out. unless you have there's certain strategy cards you can draft to help push it in your favor or mitigate the effects. But if you don't go into your home port, and when that campaign phase happens at the end of the Carthaginian draw deck, if that card comes out, it may not, and it totally may not. And I love that you can't know it's coming. You can't play it on your opponent. You can't be like, oh, storm's at sea, boom. I'm gonna, it's like, well, you're not God. You can't control the weather.
Sure, yeah.
It happens, and you don't know when it's going to happen. And so if you want to, you can say, okay, I'm Rome. I am in danger of getting sunk. I know it's about to be time for an event to come out. Maybe I should sail back to my home port, because then even if the die roll hits me, I'm not hurt. But if you do that, you're now giving up the sea for a few rounds, a few goes back and forth, right? And so Carthage will have its opportunity. I've seen it where my opponent has retreated back into his home port. I'm happy. I do a little bit of pillaging. I'm enjoying it. The die roll comes out and boom, it hits me. And it's like, well, like that really wasn't worth it. Maybe I should have went back to my home quarters. So
yeah, it sounds like you kind of assess that risk going into it. So that's tied to an event card, and you've mentioned. By the way, awesome on the sea battles. I have a general idea of how this is a tough decision to make, because there's multiple dimensions to this. This is not just a I win you lose situation. It's there's that extra sort of neutral plane that really changes this up from any conflict that ever existed in A Few Acres of Snow. Now, to go to those event cards, though, because this is a nice little, that's something that never happened. There's not a component in A Few Acres of Snow. Here, though, there is, I believe you got here 12 rounds potentially in the game, right?
Potentially. Yep.
And the event cards, you said there was 15 event cards, or is that
15?
Okay, so I mean, you're going to see most event cards in a given game. There's
a couple of reshuffles in there, which is nice too. So you can't card count.
Oh, okay.
Which is nice. So there's certain cards will have a reshuffle icon, means you reshuffle up the deck, and so you can't sit there and be like, "Oh, I know this is coming." Like I know the mercenaries are going to rebel, or I know the storm at sea it's coming next. So
okay, all right. But so what you are saying then instead is that it's something that you enjoy, that it's being kept at you're kept with a certain amount of needing to assess risks, and you're never going to just be like, okay, well, that card already came out. How many reshuffles are there in this deck of 15 cards?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I want to say it's 4, but I could be off.
It's about a decent amount. About once every 3-4 cards, you're going to be, you might get to 5 or 6 cards, but then it's going to be a reshuffle. You're not going to get through most of the deck usually. Yeah, you're not going to. But like I said too, because storms are so common, and because both sides lost their entire fleet, or darn near their entire fleet, once for Carthage and 3 times for Rome, there's 3 cards in the deck for that. 2 of them are storms, which are bad, but they don't wipe everything out. They just wipe out part of your fleet. And then there's the naval disaster, which is all your ships. And that one you said is that one weighted towards a certain one, or is that
both are weighted towards against Rome? But then later, when you have troops, when you have things like troops rebelling, that's weighted against Carthage. Of course. So
even the randomness that you're talking about here does have a balance to it, and sort of a flip of that coin.
Yep. Yep. And kind of one thing too, with the sea combat, that is the only time you will ever roll dice in this game other than events. So that's one thing I want to make clear. If you've played any of A Few Acres, everything else is input randomness in this game.
Sure.
But he talked about it. If you read his companion guide, which is on I think on the Board Game Geek files, and you can find it somewhere else on the internet. But he talked about how he tried to make it a deck builder for the sea battles too, and it just got too fat, too long. And I totally can sympathize. So, and I know you don't like the dice rolling in Time of Crisis. I chuckled so much when I heard you.
TC loves it.
I love it.
You getting PTSD just thinking about lots of dice roll. But kind of one nice thing is there are some, there are ways to bounce back. And what I like too is it's almost the one nice thing when you do lose your fleet after a big battle. It's like, well, I don't have to worry about a storm because I just got wrecked. So I'm going to go lick my wounds, and maybe I'll get lucky, and Mother Nature will come back and kick this guy. So,
what's interesting though is that it's like you have to initiate it. So you're not going to want to initiate unless you've got some sort of an upper hand. Yep. And you can sit there and peacefully coexist with your navy. But what's interesting though is that it costs you an action to initiate a sea battle, right?
Yep, and you have to have a ship card, which Rome doesn't have very many of it to begin with, and Carthage has a lot of.
So it's arguably already costing whoever initiates the battle a very important resource. So even if
Correct.
they do get, even if they do get like a bonus from it, they've already spent an action on it. So you're not going to just like willy-nilly, sure, I'll spend one of my 2 actions in the game to, start a sea battle that's essentially going to be a flip of a coin.
Yeah, no, you don't want to do that. It's like you said, in almost every card, every location that has a ship on it is almost always one that has a good high income producer. And a lot of times it is one that also has a colonist on it, which is a precious resource as well, especially for Carthage. Carthage has a lot of ships, but they're lower on manpower. They have less cards with colonists on them. And so Rome is able to rebuild much more quickly from disasters. They're able to build up their navy more quickly. There's also a card in the deck that they can draft that is only for them. That simulates an actual program they went when they realized they were going to have a navy to defend themselves and to be able to, take Syracuse and do some of these things. They put out like 120 quinqueremes and triremes in 60 days from when the first trees were felled. It was greatly aided by the fact that they found a Carthaginian ship washed up on the shore. And Carthage had like a modern day assembly line. They actually would cut these logs and they would cut and make these timbers, and then they would mark them. They would actually mark them and have them like do them all at a time. And so they discovered this. And Rome, one thing that they show an affinity for and a talent for throughout their entire period of their empire is they are not at all afraid. They are not too proud to adopt their enemy's tactics. And so
look
they're
at
like,
their gods, yeah.
They're like, oh, look at this. They have this pre-made warship, and it all like, okay, let's just start duplicating this. And this is something that they'll do. They'll not only be innovators like with things like the Corvus, but they'll also show no qualms about saying, okay, this is something that these guys do, and we can do it too, and maybe even improve on it. And so. The Navy combat is something that sometimes I've seen a lot of naval combat in games I've played, and sometimes I've seen less. It really depends on the player. You could certainly decide, I'm not going to put a lot into my Navy. I'm really going to go hard on the ground. And I honestly don't know to tell you how feasible it is to win that way. I have lost once, even when I dominated the Navy most of the game, because the Roman player just beat up on me too much on land. But I was able to stay in the game by holding. Because Corsica and Sardinia, they're so underdeveloped. They don't have a supply source on them, as I talked about. Only the island of Sicily has 2, and then there's 1 on both Italy and Africa. And so if you want to keep in supply, you have to keep the sea lanes open to Corsica and Sardinia. If at any time they get cut off, there is no overland supply. It all has to trace back over water. And so if your Navy gets shellacked, one of the first things they're going to usually do is go and cut you off in Corsica and Sardinia if you have any settlements there. And so not having a Navy, not at least being able to threaten with at least a small Navy, doesn't seem like a way. Like I said, I've seen it work. And certainly I would love to see more people play. And I hope as more people get to learn this game and we start seeing more session reports and things like that, certainly it's possible that you could play this game with very little Navy, but it just doesn't seem like it because of how critical it is to be able to supply certain locations as well as defend yourself from being just pillaged.
We were talking. The game sells itself well. Then it's hands in the sea. It's not hands in the sea or the sand. Your choice. It's
yes, no, for sure. And so we talked a little bit about naval combat. One thing I want to talk about a little bit that I think really shines in this game is land combat. So a big difference is when you do a fight, it's very similar to a few acres of snow. You go ahead, you have to have a location that's nearby, you pay the transport costs, and you start your fight. You're only going to get 4 rounds. If it's not a fortified city that you're attacking, you're only going to get 4 rounds to do this campaign. They call it a battle. It's almost better to think about it as like a series of battles or a series of skirmishing, and eventually the main armies clash. And you're going to have this, and so immediately there is pressure on you. You don't want to just do this for nothing. You want to try to win this thing, but you still have to drive the fight, the battle tracker from 1 in the defender's favor to +2 in your favor in order to get the win. And so you have a limited amount of time. So you have to have done a good job of getting troops into your reserve, getting troops into your hand, and hitting your opponent hopefully off guard, or at the very least with a better combo of troops than he has, because you don't have all day in the world to just sit there and let it languish in the gray zone like you do in A Few Acres of Snow, where you can just kind of keep drawing the conflict out. There's a definitive end, and if the battle ends after 4 rounds and no one's won, you both lose a soldier. You both lose a soldier card. And so there is no way of just being like, well, I'm going to kind of start this and go off. If you do that, you're not going to get anything done. There have been times where if I'm winning, I will do a battle even if I'm not ready for it, just to try to keep my opponent off on his heels. And hopefully just fight for a draw. Like, I don't think I can win, but I'm like, well, maybe I can tie up his resources, make him fight me enough here to hopefully get a little bit longer. Or if I'm trying to maybe get to, just to the end of the game. So I'm not saying there's never a time when you might not fight a battle almost to draw your opponent out, but for the most part, you're not going to do well if you don't think you have a way to actually win this battle in the 4 rounds.
So it's really a fleshed out battle system. I would compare A Few Acres of Snow's battle system. It leaned on the deck building more than anything else, because it was like, how efficiently could you churn out a specific military symbol? Here, you're talking about there being like sort of different combos that you can play to actually increase, and then there being like this sort of casualty system and superiority. So it's, you're talking about quite a few more, like these are developed in a way that we don't see in Few Acres of Snow.
Yeah, in Few Acres of Snow, you just have the like the crossed muskets, and you have the ship symbols. Yeah, and you do have ships and swords, but there's so much more in Hands in the Sea, because on land you have 3 troop types. You have light infantry, you have cavalry, and then you have heavy infantry. Those will always have swords, obviously, for you. And then certain locations will also have some intrinsic, like, local levies. They don't have a soldier icon, but they'll just have a sword or a ship in the bottom. Those can be contributed to a battle as well, but they don't have any specific bonuses. They will not give you any type of bonuses in combat. If you want to get the bonuses, so you can fight to a draw sometimes, but if you want to win, you need to send actual troops to the fight, because that's where you're going to get your bonuses based upon using light infantry, heavy infantry, and cavalry based upon what your opponent has played. It's an advanced rule, but it's one I really like. And like you said about, you can play it without that, where you simply have a combined arm bonus where light, heavy, and cavalry, if you play one of all, if you have a flexible force, you get a +1 bonus. That's nice. It incentivizes you to not just build one type of troop, but I really like the advanced one that's in the base rule set. It's not like it's an extension or anything. It's just it's something that's in the rules, and he says, okay, if you want to use a few of these advanced rules, you can. And I really prefer that.
It almost reminds me of the way Through the Ages does your military, with there being different tactical bonuses that you can, play to your advantage. And it, obviously not the same type of system, but you're talking about a difference between, like, essentially there's like you could play with, you want a set, essentially. Do you want a set collect with your armies, or do you want to play with different sort of advanced combinations, right?
Yeah, you definitely want to. And what's cool too is he actually has special abilities. So, for instance, Cretan archers are light infantry that either side can get. They're a neutral mercenary, but they not only fulfill the role of being a light infantry type, but they also count as 1 point of cavalry superiority because of the fact that they would often be used to help screen cavalry, and they were light and fast enough they could support cavalry. And so cavalry superiority is very important, because as the battle goes on, the Vassal app done by Judd, which is amazing, by the way, will actually keep it in a bold number. It'll actually show what your cavalry count is. Cavalry is so important back then because typically neither the winning side in a battle in this time period would typically lose about 5% of their soldiers.
Yeah. Oh, and being decimated.
Decimate the other side. And the reason is because, as Adrian Goldsworthy talks about in his book, is when you're fighting, one side eventually is going to break. And that's when all the people who have been wounded, who have been, maybe stabbed in the calf, and you can keep fighting face to face, but all of a sudden you have to turn and flee. And if you've suffered certain types, almost any type of injury that would impede your mobility, or even just the fact if your cavalry's been run off, which is what usually Carthage, that's how Hannibal was able to rack up so many kills, is his cavalry would always defeat the Roman and allied Roman cavalry. at that point, you're like, oh, well, we can run away. Well, no, your cavalry's gone. They can't protect you. And so now you're going to get cut down while you flee. And so in this game, if you want to get cavalry, but cavalry is scarce, there's not a lot of it, and Carthage has more because they just have more that are in their deck that's exclusive to them. And there's only one cavalry that's a mercenary, their Iberian mercenary cavalry. So Carthage is, unless they're just not playing to their strengths, they're always going to have more cavalry. So it might sound, oh, well, that's great. That means they can usually keep their losses down when they lose, and it means they can inflict more losses when they win, because cavalry superiority comes into play both winning and losing a battle. However, it's not quite that simple, because Rome has twice as much heavy infantry cards. Heavy infantry, along with the elite Numidian cavalry, are the only cards in the game in land battles and standard field battles that give you 2 swords. So they pack a lot of punch. So you can have a ton of one sword cards in your hand, but you can only play 2 cards at a time. Then you have to pass back to your opponent. So if I'm sitting with a cavalry and a light infantry, I can play 1 sword and 1 sword. And let's not talk about the bonuses, because I don't want to get too far into the weeds. But okay, I put in 2 swords and I moved it 2 spaces. I moved it 2 spaces on my start. If my Roman opponent is sitting with 2 legions in his hand, he plays 2 and a 2-sword legion and another 2-sword legion. Just between us back and forth, he's now pushed it 2 in his favor. And now I'm staring at a so Rome has the legions. So as Carthage, you have to be very shifty and compiling a good combo to help get as many bonuses against Rome as you can. Because if Rome really pushes hard, they can field they will always have a better infantry force than you. But again, and this is the beauty of the trade-offs of this game, is if Rome is spending colonist cards and money to recruit infantry, that means they're not building a navy, which now means they're likely going to be getting raided and pillaged. And so,
the raiding and pillaging is almost like not the same type of conflict, but in A Few Acres of Snow, you had Native Americans that, that the French controlled better, whereas the British could see, I'm seeing it's almost like you're painting like the Romans into a pseudo-British and the Carthaginians into a pseudo-French. And I'm sorry I interrupted you. I just, that's really interesting.
There's some real similarities. So it kind of, like you talked about, the fact that, the British have more regulars quite a bit than the French, which is accurate as well. They had a lot more people on the mainland, and they just had more regulars in general. Yeah, the French definitely relied more on auxiliaries, whether it was their courrier de bois. I'm sure I messed that up for French, but they're Indian allies, but certainly it gave them certain advantages. And for Carthage, it's the same. Carthage has lower cost troops to recruit. They cost less. Carthage will have more money anyway because their starting locations are more valuable. They have more ship icons, which allow them to do trade missions, whereas Rome is going to struggle to do trade missions early on because they don't have as many boats. And so Carthage starts out as this rich power, as it was. It's got lots of money. It can recruit mercenaries quickly. The problem is that as Rome builds up her military might and starts drafting legions especially, you're going to be hard-pressed to stand toe-to-toe to them.
Wow.
Carthage only won about 2 land battles in the entire First Punic War, and by my count, Rome won 6. And one of those was because Carthage, one of the few ones that Carthage won is because they got Xanthippus, the Spartan mercenary, and he actually realized, y'all been doing this all wrong. You're fighting this phalanx set type battle and trying to use your infantry against Rome. We have better cavalry, so let's actually fight on a wide open plain where we can, and he in many ways kind of set the stage for what Hannibal would eventually master, which is using his infantry as bait and switch and as not a decoy, but as basically he would set them out in certain ways and either do like a partial retreat, or he would simply have them fall back. And he would do this maneuver multiple times where he would then use his superior cavalry to wipe out the wings of the Romans. Yeah. And then just absolutely, lay in on the back and basically negate the Roman infantry. So the Roman infantry are truly elite. They have more of them. They have great power density by the fact that they can do 2 swords per card, whereas Carthage has only 1 card in the deck that does that for them, and that's the Numidians. They also have war elephants. The problem with war elephants, and I guess I did lie to you earlier, that's the only other time you roll a die, is war elephants. You roll a 1, you get 0 swords. They're worthless to you.
Oh.
You roll a 2 through a 3, you get 1 sword. A 4 through a 5, you get 2, and a 6, you get 3.
Holy crap! Wow. So,
but again,
they can be a really impactful piece. But I bet when you play with them, you're probably counting on them being generally like, it's got to be like an epic fail for them to roll that 1. Like you're counting on them being like at least as good as a regular troop and up to the strongest troop in the game, right?
Yes, you are. And but here's again the beauty of it. The Romans quickly developed the tactics with their velites to basically shower them with javelins. And for the most part, they never struggled. After a couple of bad encounters, they never really struggled with elephants again. And the Carthaginians continue to try to use it. And honestly, the elephants probably maybe a little more overpowered than they should have been historically, because the Romans really started encountering war elephants against Pyrrhus when they were fighting the Greeks, and Pyrrhus was fighting them on the Roman mainland. This is around the time of what TC was alluding to, Sword of Rome, which is about 100 years before this. They learned very quickly how to create channels in their lines and how to use their velite skirmishers to shower javelins on these troops. And for the most part, by the end of that conflict with Pyrrhus, they had learned mostly how to deal with elephants. And that's not to say that it didn't always work. Carthage, Xanthippus actually did use elephants correctly. He was able to hold them a little bit longer rather than just sending them out as like a charge at the beginning. He actually held them a little bit longer in reserve, made it a little bit harder for the Romans to deal with them. But the elephants are great at first, and if your opponent doesn't do anything about it, you will typically do really well with your elephants. However, if he gets velites, which are the light skirmishing light infantry, they're a very cheap unit for Rome. Yep, they're 3 silver. This is the cheapest unit Rome can recruit. And if they fight in a battle where the elephants are already present, they're going to get to roll a die 50-50. They'll get to add an extra sword just on their own on that roll. Plus, they get a bonus already from fighting elephants. And so if you prepared right, elephants can be somewhat negated. At the same time, I've never yet rolled a 1. I've gotten very lucky. I've never rolled a 1 for elephants. I say that now, and it's going to happen.
They're going to do that. Bam!
Yeah, but I also don't ever seem to roll 6s. It seems like I always get like 1 or 2 swords, which is fine. But
well, it's kind of what you're anticipating, right? You're never like going into a battle like, well, counting on the 6 here. There's way too many decisions going into it. And what is it? The old wargamer adage that if you lost due to a dice roll, then why'd you let it come down to a dice roll?
I literally had that written down here on my notes to say at some point of like. You have to kind of say that at the end is like, it's like, oh, that event, like it went against me. Okay, well, why'd you let it get to that point?
The old adage is the dice favor no one.
Yes. Yeah. And
there's definitely some other pieces here. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, finish up.
I was just going to say that, some people say like, oh, the combat's really swingy. Like if I win and I had cavalry superiority, I both get to choose what unit my enemy loses. I can pick his most valuable one, and I also get to capture the location and then settle it if I have the appropriate card. If it's a colonist, I don't even have to have a colonist if it's not a large location. And my answer to that would simply be is like, well, actually, if anything, the game is too nice to the loser. Like the loser should have his army wiped out and have to build it from scratch. Or darn near.
You also mentioned like to be able to get that, you have to have cavalry superiority, right? So
Correct.
That's another bargaining chip in it as well. Like when you're fighting against a cavalry superiority, you're going to want to be cagey and not be like, here's my best unit, hope I win.
Yep. There's been times where I've gone into the 3rd or 4th round of battle as Rome, and it's like, okay, I want to commit this legion. I want to go for the win. But what if I don't win? And what if he has, I know he's got his Numidians maybe, which might still be coming. I don't know where they are in the deck. So it's like, do I go and commit my legions? Can I go to the triarii, as the Romans would say, go to the last measure and send my legions? But I know if I don't have cav superiority, that if I lose, he's going to get to wipe out one of my legions. They're expensive and manpower intensive to get. And so that's the game I talked about. Why I love this game is like, there's so many, like a lot of games you have some decision points where you make tough decisions. You look back later and you're like, okay, there was 3 or 4 game decisions I could have made that could have made this game go differently. There's like 20 of these in a game, I feel like, when you play a full game, where it's like, oh man, I did that decision. And you can't blame it on the dice. You can say like, I made a gamble. I thought he wouldn't have his Numidian cavalry ready, and they were. He shackled his deck and it was there. It just was. Or he tricked me, and he made it seem like he was going to give up on this conflict, and then boom, he sandbagged me, and at the very end, he had saved his Carthaginian heavy infantry and Numidian mercenaries and just wrecked me and made me lose my legion. So there's so many tough decisions in this game of like, do I go? Do I put my elite troops to try to seal a deal, or do I just say, you know what, I'm gonna, or do I try to push for a draw? Like, there's multiple ways to approach battle, and I'm still learning things as I play. Of like, okay, I could have done this differently, or I should never have even fought this. Like, why was I fighting this to begin with? Like it was just a dumb fight for me to pick.
Sure. Well, you're not just going to be going into every game with, like a Furious Snow is essentially a static startup with the only randomness being these decks that get shuffled, and you draw 5 cards of, you're given however, 8 cards for the British. And I think it's like a little bit more for the French, maybe 10 or 11. Here, though, you've got another element going into it. I mean, you've got strategy cards.
Yes. Yep. So this is the secret sauce of the game, honestly, right here.
The secret
sauce. So
I like
it. This is what makes it so great is at the beginning of the game is there's going to be a array of 3 cards. You're going to shuffle up. I want to say it's 15. It's either 15 or 12 strategy cards. I want to say it's 15, just like the event. And they're going to come out, and they're common for either side to pick from. Some are going to be exclusive to one side, but most are common. And you can draft them, and you can only ever have one at a time. And basically, it's like your empire, Rome or Carthage, has decided to make this a focus, a policy. And it could be everything from we're going to recruit Carthaginian or Gallic mercenary allies as Carthage to give us a bonus every time we do an attack. It can be the shipbuilding thing I talked about, where Rome, instead of having to spend 3 silver and a colonist card to get 1 single ship added to their squadron. And again, a ship doesn't actually represent 1 ship. It probably represents a group of about 20, but we'll just call it a ship. They can now play 1 colonist card and 5 silver. So you're getting a 1 discount on the silver and 1 less colonist card, and 1 action. You can build 2 ships. This represents, and he talks about the reason why he puts all these cards in his little companion guides. I highly recommend you read it. This is a way of, rather than having special rules to deal with this massive shipbuilding campaign that Rome embarked on multiple times. It's a strategy card in the deck that Rome can get. And it allows them to very quickly replace their losses. So while Carthage is better at avoiding storms and things like that, Rome can get this card for themselves, and they can hold it. And as long as that card's there, they'll have that ability. Same with Carthage. You can have things like something that seems very good, like administration, which allows you to draft 2 cards for 1 action rather than just 1 card per action, or discard 2 cards.
Could you tell me just the nuts and bolts a little bit? I'm trying to still visualize what specifically that strategy card is. That something that's at the very beginning of the game that you obtain?
Yeah. So sorry, I kind of went deeper.
No. I totally get it, dude. I get the effects that they're having. I just and this is something just for me because I'm trying to picture is this something that you get at the beginning of the game and then you're talking about cycling through your deck, or is this something?
So no, so you have your player mat, right? And you'll each will have a slot that says strategy card, and it'll say max of 1.
Okay.
And at the beginning, both of you don't have any, and there's a deck of 15 of these strategy cards, and they're gonna flip out 3, and they're gonna be in an array. And at any time, as one of your actions, you can choose to draft it for the cost of silver that's on the card, and it'll tell you, and then you'll put it on your little mat, and it'll be there.
So you don't even get it right away. It's like this is a tool you could go for.
Yep, it's a tool you could go for. It will never be free. Some cost more than others. Some are better than others. The other thing, though, is you don't know when that card's going to come. But the beauty of it is one of the actions you can take is you can spend a little bit of silver to cycle them. So there's only ever 3 face up at a time. And so it's like, man, I want to build ships as Rome, but that ship card hasn't come out yet. Okay, I can spend 2 silver and cycle all 3 off and bring 3 new ones on. Okay, and eventually I'm going to get there. It's not going to take long. Sure. And even if you don't spend any silver or an action to cycle the cards, every time Carthage finishes their deck and you have that campaign phase where you collect income and score points and have the random event, you also at the end of that cycle 1 card off the end and draw a new one. So that deck will constantly be churning. But once you buy that strategy card, it goes on and it's yours. And you have that for as long as you want but if you ever want to do another strategy card, you first have to discard that and then acquire the new card.
Now, are these all just this is going to really hit me hard if this is the truth. They cost you an action to buy this strategy card then, and it costs you an action to discard, and it costs you
So it just costs you an action to buy the card and the silver on it, and then you have that the rest of the game, as long as you don't want to get rid of it, right? So you don't ever want to play without these. I'm not saying you should always have a strategy card all at any given time. There are times where you might say like, I don't need one right now, but once you buy it, there's no reason not to keep it. Again, you can also play with an option where they have lower costs on the front end and you pay a maintenance cost. I'm not sure how I feel about that. That's the idea, is that it makes you actually have to pay to continue your that policy. But if you play with the base rules of the game, which I would definitely recommend to keep it simpler, you do that one action, you buy the strategy card, and you could have it potentially for the rest of the game if you wanted to. Yes, it does cost you money that you could use to, say, recruit troops or recruit a general. But it's going to be something that's going to contribute to you over the long term. And it can be everything from building ships more efficiently. It can be something that gives you a bonus in attacking as Carthage. It can be something that makes your administration more efficient. May not seem very cool, but being efficient with thinning your deck and drafting cards more quickly is certainly a way to, I've won with that card in a couple of games.
Wow, that is so cool. Like, just the idea that every single game you've got this deck of 15 cards, you're going to shuffle them all. You're going to put 3 face up. Is it a specific player that always is going to draft first at the beginning? Is that kind of like how they balance turn order?
So it's always going to be Rome's first. So Carthage gets the advantage of they can sometimes try to fiddle with the deck so that they get the event to, maybe they really want to try to settle something first before the event comes out right at the end of their turn. They want to get something done. But Rome's advantage is they always go first after the end of the game turn. And so, yes, Rome will always have first shot. It's kind of a way of balancing out the fact that Carthage gets to control the pacing of the game.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's something that I don't even think is present at all in A Few Acres of Snow. It doesn't have like a balance between pacing and No, the pacing is very deliberate.
The pacing is deliberate, and it's something I didn't really want to talk about too much because it's not something that even grabs you at first. It takes a few plays to appreciate how Carthage should use that to their advantage. And again, but as you reminded me, Rome always gets to go first, and so Rome will always get first dibs at that new strategy card that comes out. And another thing they can do, if a card comes out that they're afraid Carthage will get, if they have enough money in the bank, they can cycle. Which they should. They can go ahead and cycle those cards off, so that Carthage can't get it. But the problem is you don't even know what your opponent's thinking. There's a lot of, and so maybe you spend an action and 2 silver to cycle the whole tableau of 3,
and he's already got the cards he needs.
Maybe Carthage didn't even want that card. So I find myself not doing it a lot. But again, maybe I should be doing it more. I don't know.
You should be doing it defensively. Who knows? I mean, but how often are you really shifting your strategy? I mean, you're talking about spending actions here in a game where, like I've said before, like every time that you lose an action, your opponent can capitalize on that by some of the other elements in the game. It seems like a really interesting, intricate system. And to me, like the fact that this is like a persistent capability that you just have for as long as you can, and until you discard it, and it's just this initiative. That to me, absolutely. It doesn't seem to like there could just be some dominant thing that you can do. There's so many more cogs spinning here than you saw in A Few Acres of Snow. So really, really cool that way, man. That has me extremely, extremely interested.
Yeah, you could get rid of the events, honestly, and the strategy cards would keep you from having a Halifax hammer on itself. In addition to the supply stuff I talked about, because the fact is, you might think like, oh, I just pounded Rome's navy. Like now I'm going to run roughshod all over them. Well, the next turn, Rome decides to cycle a couple of cards. Shipbuilding comes up. They draft it with their second action. Boom. Now he's got the shipbuilding card. There's nothing I can do, and all he's going to do is start cranking out ships. And okay, it's like, so now what am I going to do about that? Well, I could draft the Greek Allies card if it comes out, which gives me extra ships to naval combat. So okay, he's going to build. Like there's just so much cat and mouse, and it's like, okay,
it's like shifting into a whole new gear. Like there's certain sort of expected strategies when I sit down to play a game of Few Acres of Snow, especially on teaching new players. I'm kind of like, okay, well, these are generally the few things that people tend to go for. They're like the low hanging fruit. Here, you're talking about cards that essentially represent that low-hanging fruit, but they're shuffled into a deck, and they're going to be constantly changing, you know? Yes, once you get that ability, it'll probably seem to your opponent like, oh, that's broken, but it's like, you know, you kind of let them get there. They're wasting actions. You had the ability to capitalize. That's a crazy cool system.
Yeah, that's the hardest part of the game to master for me, is when to take that strategy card, because you know, they are usually expensive. They're usually 4 to 6 silver. I mean, that's you know, either a good cavalry card or war elephants or a heavy infantry even. But it's like, yeah, if you don't get a strategy card, like, you're really doing yourself a disservice, because it's a power up you have for as long as that card is in your possession.
As long as you can like economically sustain it for the short term, it sounds like it's a long-term benefit in most cases.
Yep. And I find myself, usually most cards, you don't keep it for the whole game though, because a lot of times you use it to help yourself in a certain situation. Like I said, if you're Rome, you might want to get the Corvus, which is this large plank with a big iron spike that they would use, and they used it in something the Carthaginians had never seen before. And they used it to basically, every time they would get close enough to a ship, and usually what you do is you would ram or potentially board after you sheared off someone's oars. You know, that was usually how these battles were fought. Well, Rome's like, okay, we have a great great army, we have great soldiers, so let's go ahead and load up with extra marines, pair down on our archers, and every time a ship gets close, we're going to use this big wooden plank, about a 10-meter long plank with a big iron spike, and it's going to drop down, hammer onto the deck, and then our troops are just going to go. And it's like, you can't, and think about how terrifying that would be. You're like a lightly armed archer, and suddenly there's a legionnaire, you know, marching over
Jonathan,
this plank.
I gotta ask, man, this has been begging. I can't hold it any longer. Did you read all about this before or after you started this game, playing this game?
Before the game.
So hold on, man. Hold on. Whoa. You knew all about this conflict, then you played the game, and it's like the game is just activating all these synapses in your brain that are from this sort of what you're almost, I would consider, a mini expert, because you've read, you know, this is incredible that, you know, that you got such a high opinion of a game that's about a topic that you are so, you know, passionate about and knowledgeable about.
Well, growing up in Northwest Iowa, rural Northwest Iowa, you do a lot of reading, especially back in the day.
That's where I live. Hey, hold on. You're not allowed to say that. Nobody else lives here.
Yeah.
For sure, man.
Hey, Boone, Iowa is like, that's like a metropolis compared to growing up in a cornfield. But seriously, I mean, I loved it, but this game has spurred me to read even more about the topic. But, you know, kind of, so going back to something like with the Corvus, if you draft that as Rome, now not only are your legions the great advantage for your land battles, but if they're in your reserve, you can add them to the naval battles. And whereas regular ships hit on a 5 and a 6, the legions hit on a 3 up. So you're almost guaranteed. Like, if you have a couple legions, you're going to get some shots. And if you win the battle, you get to capture ships, which is what they did. So you get the Corvus, and basically Carthage has to basically run scared and play cat and mouse, or just, you almost have to like basically say, I'm going to just build a lot of ships and try to have more than you. You almost want to go away, but the downside to Corvus is, as it historically was, Rome kept losing their navies. They would beat Carthage with their Corvus, and then it made their ships so unseaworthy that a storm would come along and they'd get wrecked. And they're like, well, okay, we took all of Carthage's navy, but now we've lost almost all of ours. That's why they eventually actually abandoned it near the end of the First Punic War. But it served its purpose. They wrecked the Carthaginian fleet a couple times with it, and Carthage only beat them once after they instituted the Corvus. I believe it was the Battle of Drepana.
Well, it seems like at that point the Romans had adopted so much of like the way that the Carthaginians handled their you know, their efficient sort of assembly line of ship creating. Yeah, they really by that point kind of gotten almost parity, which is brings me to another game mechanism, if you don't mind me bringing this up, but like the income in the game here is quite different. Like, there's no real engine building going on in a game of a few acres of snow. Everything sort of engine building, but I would say that, like, depending on if you're playing as the British or as the French, it's almost like this engine that you're trying to get to fill up with all the fuel, so that way you can, you know, get it to actually kick on and run really efficiently and get lots of money, and then be able to hopefully coast for a little while after that, you know. But here you're talking about actual engine building.
Yeah, that's honestly Man. I had this great outline, and all these notes and stuff, and I just found myself going on these rabbit trails. That's something I didn't even think about that now I missed is the economic engine in this game cannot be overlooked, because if you get fat with a military without having to have all these rules with administration and being kind, like if you're a grognard or kind of a medium grognard like me, that's fun. This game, you can choke on your military. I've had that happen. You build up your military too much and you don't have your location cards right, or you thin your deck too much, and all of a sudden you constantly are having a hand that's half full of military units. You can't travel anywhere. You can't collect income to put troops in reserve and then be able to retrieve them. You're basically foundering. So without having to put in a bunch of rules, just by how the game works, the deck building mechanic, you have to have your economic engine, and you have to keep it fine-tuned, because most of the starting locations are pretty good for you. They represent like how your republic came to be what it was. You've had a couple that aren't that great, but most of them are pretty good. But a lot of the territory that you capture, especially the kind of more podunk cities in Sicily and Corsica and Sardinia, that aren't the big name cities, those ones are going to be basically like a cart and a coin. Whereas like Carthage is like 4 coins, a ship, a colony, like there's all this stuff. And so you want to thin your deck, but if you thin it too much, you all of a sudden find yourself with lots of soldiers or lots of administration type cards, but you don't actually have still what is the base of your engine, which is you need cards to be able to transport, to be able to get places to fight. You need to be able to have cards to conduct pillaging, to conduct naval battles, all that stuff. And so you're constantly trying to make sure that you can keep your income going through the cards you're using, but you also need to be able to make sure you also build up a military. And so it's such a tough thing to manage, and it's something that I'm constantly trying to get better at. Is how do I make sure I'm still collecting income? Because there is as you pointed out, one of the things in your notes is that there is a passive income that you get at the end of every turn. For every developed city you have, you get 1 silver, but that's not very much. At the beginning, you each have 2 cities, so you get 2 silver a turn if you don't develop any more cities. That won't even buy you. That won't even buy you light infantry for the most part. Like Carthage, who has access to, there's a couple cheap mercenaries they can get for 2, but it's not going to get you much. And at that point, okay, I drafted 1 card that I used up my entire tax base. That's what that represents, by the way. According to the game designers, that represents you basically doing additional developments, making it basically into a metropolis, from like a fledgling colony town to a metropolis. And so, you do want to do that, and that's another beautiful aspect of this game. Kind of that inflection point of, at the beginning, do I want to use my colonists to develop, to increase my tax base, to get more cities? Do I want to use it to be drafting heavy infantry? Do I want to use it to be building ships? Or more likely, I'm going to do a combination of the 3. I'm going to both be trying to build some ships, trying to develop certain key cities to be able to build up a taxable income. But I also want to be, not doing any so much that I give my opponent a huge opening, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah. I'm right there with you, man. Like this, because you've got a certain amount of income, you do have like a little bit of an ability to sort of pursue a more warfare strategy, like centered strategy at the beginning. But as you said, if you do that too much and don't balance it towards developing your economy and managing what cards you have access to, you end up, like you said, choking on your military. So it's the economic system here seems like it once again is slightly more than what you'll see in A Few Acres of Snow, where it all just, was very much tied to just the deck that you started with and the deck that you had throughout the game. Here you've got a few more things to consider and a few more things that you can use your deck to improve. But once you've used your deck for that, the rest of the game from that point on has changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So really, really cool. I mean, man, we have touched on a lot of really awesome.
That's a lot. That's pretty cool.
What about so the game timer here? We actually do have a game timer as opposed to A Few Acres of Snow, which is like, there is a technical game timer because once people run out of pieces, but like here you've got 12 rounds, right?
Yeah, that's the max it'll ever go.
Are you talking 24 total actions, or is there multiple turns in a round?
So the way it works is you start out, like I said.
Never mind. I knew that. I'm sorry. Go on. Re-explain it for everybody who's as dumb as me.
No worries. It's a
Using the
lot.
words.
I'm giving y'all. This is how I feel sometimes when I listen to y'all talk about games where I'm like drinking through a fire hose and I have to like pause the podcast so I can just go look at the rule set for a second. So when you get your cards, you're always going to be taking 2 actions, and sometimes those actions won't be using a card at all, and sometimes they'll be spending multiple cards or even just one card. And every time the Carthaginian player, doesn't matter about the Roman player, the Carthaginian player, every time he's gone through his deck and they're all in his discard pile, at the bottom there's a campaign, and that represents the end of that game turn. There's some administrative stuff that goes on, some income is collected, an event will come out, it has to get resolved, some of that stuff. The strategy cards will cycle 1, like I talked about. But that represents 1 game turn. And so the very first game turn will go super fast. You have 12 cards, right? 5 are already in your hand, 7 are in your discard pile. Within 2 or 3 actions of 2, like we talked about, right? Because you take 2 actions. First game turns over super fast. But you've already added some settlements, you've added some locations, so your discard pile filled up a little bit. You've hopefully drafted a couple of Empire cards as well. Maybe some light infantry or things like that. And so your second turn takes a little bit longer. And your third, so you kind of have this, it's almost like a, I'm trying to think of it, but it very quickly starts to build
up, or can it is it something where because the Carthaginian player is in control and dictates the pace of the game, like you said, which is unheard of, in the previous design that we keep on referring to. Is it a Carthaginian strategy to sort of see that your Roman player is adding lots and lots of cards and be like, okay, well, I'm going to get rid of my cards so that way he's going to choke on that big. Well, yep. I'm not going to say that.
No.
Anyway,
that is a legitimate strategy, and it is one you have to be wary of as the Roman player because Carthage, because it has more ships, because it can settle more quickly through its ship cards, allow it to grab certain key locations more quickly. Carthage will usually jump out to a lead. They pretty much always should, because while there is some randomness of what cards you get first and which combos you can settle first, Carthage should jump out to an early lead. However, Rome needs to realize that that's going to happen. Don't panic. The first couple of game turns, Carthage is going to build a little bit of lead, but that's not a problem. Rome needs to make sure that they have a plan, though, to start winning some conflicts, either by building up a navy that can then start pounding Carthage and then either pillaging or using that to cut off their settlements, which, by the way, do not count for victory points at the end of a turn. So if you do have settlements, if you're cut off from supply, they don't even count at the end of a game turn. So when Carthage hits that, their discard or their draw deck is exhausted, if you're cut out of supply at that point, you don't get any points for those. So Rome has to have a way. Carthage is going to jump out to that early lead, but Rome's advantages will start to shine in the forms of more colonists and better infantry. And like I said, there's a million other ways to play it as well. But there is a pacing aspect. And TC, it seems like you played the most. A few acres. Maybe you can talk about the fact that I always felt, from what I've read about, and I've read more about a few acres and I've played it, but definitely I noticed just based on when I started looking at the roster of a few acres, it's like, okay, because of the fact that there's no definitive end to combat and there's no definitive end to the game, the fact that the British have so many more regulars than the French do, that's just a long-term advantage. That seems like as the British drags, they're going to, it's not a fait accompli, but it's something that they are going to prevail. Whereas Carthage has that early jump, but Rome is going to start coming back as they did historically. Although part of it was just that Carthage was there first. Carthage got to Sicily before Rome did, but Rome is going to start coming back, and it's like in some ways almost Carthage is trying to hang on at the end. If the Roman player has done well, Carthage is trying to hang on to the end and say, can I at least hold enough of Sicily, or at least have won enough big battles that I can still be the victorious one.
Yeah, and just hang on to the end of the game. That's really interesting. I know in Few Acres, man, once the British start getting a foothold, it's pretty hard. Carissa plays the British very, very well, and I always felt like at a disadvantage when I'm the French. And the biggest advantage the French have is the way they can. They could use the Indians really effectively. So it's. Yep. Yeah, I hear you on Few Acres. If I've got my rear end handed to me quite a few times by the British.
Yeah, and like you talked about, the other thing with land is the British or the Carthaginians do, because they have more cavalry. one of the way they can kind of offset the Romans' martial advantage is Carthage can raid more because they have more cavalry, as long as you recruit it, of course, which you should. They can raid more. And so if the Roman player doesn't have cards ready to block, he will find those hard-fought, military gains that he had to fight land battles for. He's going to find himself, it doesn't automatically capture and convert, but it removes the cube, and now it's a free-for-all to who can get to that space first. It's basically been cut off from supply, and it's basically right for the picking. So that's another key asymmetric whole situation that's going on there.
Jeez, man. Yeah, the layers. It's an onion. It's really an onion, which is the perfect game to discuss on the long view. We have consistently discussed historical value throughout this. I think that every element of this game that we've talked about mechanically, Jonathan, you've been right there with hold on, this is why, the Romans would, drive this big stake into the ground and all right, yeah.
Let's talk about before we wrap this up, let's talk about the availability of this game and what you get. I noticed that it recently had a second Kickstarter, and intriguingly enough, it looks like it has a companion book that goes into a lot of the details of the history of the game and the design of it. Have you got your hands on that companion book?
I did. So, one thing we were talking about a little bit before is I actually got to this right after the Kickstarter had closed. I went ahead because I love the time period, because Judd Vance, I was actually super skeptical of this game because I was like, really? A deck builder war game? That's going to be too light, too whatever. I had fiddled a little bit. It's going to be a Euro.
Nobody likes those.
No, I actually do like Euros. It's just when I'm a Euro, I'm in Euros mode. And when I want war, I want theme. And I felt like the theme was kind of lacking a little bit. But Judd Vance sold me on it, and the fact that he had done all this work and he talked about it so much, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna trust Judd on this one, because he and I have very similar tastes based on what he's reviewed. And so I went with this, and I got the companion guide. I got the extra components, which you don't have to get. It just is a little more nice. They're just upgraded.
They're wooden pieces, aren't they?
Yeah, nice little wooden pieces rather than wooden discs for your cities. You now get an actual little city meeple, and different things like that. It's not critical. It's something that you could probably even get after the fact if you like the game enough to do it.
Yeah, I like doing that too.
Yeah. And it looks like it comes with little coins too.
Yeah, you can get the upgrades. You'll get the better map without the valleys in it if you get this second edition. Like I said, I have the first edition. I am just going to be ordering the upgraded map.
Is that a mounted board, or is it was a first edition like a paper?
It was mounted. No, it was mounted, even the first one, but it had that valley issue because of how it was cut.
Okay, gotcha.
So one of the reasons I was trying to let people know about this too is this is a good time. If this game interests you, there's some good videos on. I'm probably going to try to do a couple. I'm not a savvy guy when it comes to multimedia, but I'm going to try to do some basic tutorial stuff. To kind of let people know about just some base out of this game. Judd did that a little bit of an overview on Bonding with Board Games channel. He did a little bit of an overview as well, but basically the game is going to be available through Kickstarter if you missed the window there, but it doesn't ship until I want to say May.
Yeah, it says you can pre-order it on their website even if you missed a Kickstarter.
Even if you missed a Kickstarter, and that's what I did. I got mine very shortly after the other Kickstarter people did, and honestly. It's something that's still available. I don't know how much it's going to be available online or FLGS. Once that pre-order time is closed. Noble Nightworks is a part-time publisher. It's not. I think it's Don Lloyd, I believe is his name. It's not his full-time job or anything. But he's done a good job. He's put out a good product. And I will say this about Dan. I don't know him personally or anything, but whenever I've emailed him little questions or even just post on the forums, he responds super quickly. And in his whole companion guide, which I got with it, you can also find it online. He gives a lot of good reasons, and he even does a little mini design diary, which I always appreciate about GMT games. Is they'll say look, here's why I did this, and I realize some people might not like it, but here's why. And I tried doing it, this X, Y, and Z, and in the end, I had to be Z because these other ways didn't work. And he talks about that. And he also has a great bibliography, and actually he references Adrian Goldsworthy, a couple of books of his that he read and used for developing this game. And I thought I
remember when following this game before he even found a publisher, this was a print and play, and he had done a lot of play testing with this before GameWorks even got their hands on it to make their version of it.
Yep. And I will tell you too, one thing I will say that's kind of a bonus about this game is the Vassal module is absolutely a thing of beauty. It automates almost everything. Whereas usually Vassal, you have to know all the rules yourself.
You have to like work it yourself. Yeah.
You have to work yourself. Judd Vance, my gosh, I think he's probably had to spend like 100 hours at least on this. And he's even said it himself. He's a guru at Vassal. He made just a beautiful module on this. And so if y'all ever want to get a game in, just let me know, either PVEM or live. I'd be happy to play. I play a lot. That's how I mostly play this game. And almost all of it's automated. And it's really nice for a guy like me who, I have a wife and a small boy. And it's like, it's not always easy to get a game going on like a weekend or something, but I can certainly log in and take, 10, 15 minutes to play some turns on my different Vassal games and things like that.
Sure.
And if you play live, when I have played it live, usually like typing on Skype or something like that, usually you can get this game done in about 2 hours to 2.5. It really is fairly fast playing for how much depth. It packs a ton of depth into a short play time. Of course, when I got killed by that guy from Spain, that game was done in 90 minutes because he auto victoried me and he got ahead of me by 25 points, which is that's like the mercy roll, the cap out, and so that happened. And he had used some combos and some strategies that I hadn't thought about, and it's like, wow, he just kicked me. What I think a hallmark of why this is such a good game is like, I don't, when I lose, I always am like, man, I've learned something. And it's one of those games where like the next day you're at work and you're focused on whatever, and all of a sudden it's like something pops in your head. It's like, what if I'd done this? What if I'd done that? And I always think that's a hallmark of a good game. Like, and why I still gravitate to war games more than Euros is I find myself playing the what if game days after it's over. Whereas most Euro games, even if I've gotten deep into it in the middle of the game and I've really enjoyed it, usually it's over. Like my brain space has now been decluttered when the game is over and I walk away from it. And these war games, it's like, man, it's, you finish the game and it's like 2-3 days later, you're like driving home or something. It's like, what if I'd done this? What if I'd done that? Like, man, that decision, that was really
So you're
really
saying
foolish.
it's a game that haunts you.
Oh yeah, you said it's like an onion and all the layers, and it will also make you cry a little bit.
There you go. I like it. Did you play the 28 card mini expansion for the game?
Yes, I have, and it's pretty good in that it has some alternate events, and it'll tell you that it's an alternate with a little question mark on it. It makes it just a little bit less harsh, which I think is really nice, because some people just don't like the randomness of the events. They don't like that can shellac one side versus another. Yeah. If you don't like that, use the alternate events.
Cool.
And that's nice. It also has maintenance, which is an idea that he brought in for tournament play, possibly, as well as that. He kind of thought, like, look, I've done all this play testing, but what if it turns out that certain strategy cards like really just are too overpowered in certain ways? The idea is it has a building maintenance cost every round. And so it basically, at some point, you'll have to pay so much, you'll want to basically get rid of a strategy card. It kind of forces you to cycle your strategy card every, potentially 3 to 4 turns rather than keeping it, say, an entire game.
Maybe what he wanted to do is to keep players cycling between them. Yeah, basically, like, in the way that you've described it, the cost is higher. It's just kind of like, it's more of a sunken cost, whereas here, your sunken cost is something that you have to weigh the upcoming cost with it.
Like shipbuilding is 5 silver for Rome, and if you're playing just the standard. If you get the maintenance version, I want to say it's only 3 up front, but after the first turn it's free. There's no upkeep. But after that, if you want to keep it, you have to start paying 2 silver and then 4 silver, and then so it's not something that you can just keep all game and be like, I'm going to be the shipbuilding superpower of the world. That I'm just going to, which in some ways it's like, okay, that's probably not a bad idea. And so you can certainly play with it, or you don't have to. The only one I'm not a huge fan of is the Deus Ex Machina. And that's one that I haven't used a lot. But again, that's a small part of the expansion. I definitely think the mini expansion is worth it.
What is the Deus Ex Machina? Is that a specific card, or is that a variant?
Yeah, you basically get it put in as like a whole card. It's almost like a home card or a whole card that's like you get to hold it for like that really big moment, and it allows you to do certain things. You can either like sacrifice like a couple of victory points to win a battle or something like that.
Like a hugely impactful one-time use ability, and each side gets it.
Yep, each side gets a card like that. They get, and it's basically it's a one-shot wonder, unlike a strategy card or anything else. It's kind of think TC Desperate Times a little bit, sort of Rome reference there. But the Desperate Times I like more because I guess I feel like in Desperate Time, I don't know. I just don't like the Deus Ex Machina. I probably should give it more of a shot.
It's probably because it's more tacked on than
exactly. That's it. It feels tacked on, whereas with Sword of Rome, Desperate Times feels like it's an integral part of trying to even out some of the variants of like, oh, I just drew a crappy hand and it's all 1-op cards. Well, at least I got this 3-op in my whole and is a whole card. Whereas you don't have that issue with Hands in the Sea.
Gotcha. So you've gone into how this 28 card mini expansion already, like, you know, it's not just improving on one part of the game. You're talking about adding sort of, you know, like the buzzwords, the things that we've mentioned before, that the randomness that some players have clearly come out opposed to in BGG posts.
Yep.
That this changes that, or at least gives options, you know, whereas maybe this isn't as historically flavorful as what the designer intended, but it's something that's, you know, he's looking to please, you know, to make his game system work. It's one that it seems like he's willing to sort of pull strings to make it work for you. It looks like he's also added in a second edition specific, added like a token called the Fate token.
Yep. Yeah, so that's something I actually wrote him about, and I was like, look, I love your game. It's amazing. It's what I love. And I said, I actually don't mind the random events. I used to always like all the control. I always felt like that way always the player who played the best won. But then whenever you read about war and just like almost anything, it's like there's so much randomness, so much out of control. Like you need to have that chaos element of like, I don't know what this next thing could happen. And you know, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. Something's going to go wrong that you didn't foresee. And a good commander takes advantage of that. So I like the randomness. It's going to throw you off your game. You know, you're either going to have to discard a card, or maybe you'll have to lose ships, or your mercenaries might rebel as Carthage, etc. All those things can happen. But one thing I did find, because you're rolling a single die, one side can get on a bad streak where like 4 or 5 times in a row you get hit with the negative event.
Yeah.
And some people really that left a bad taste in the mouth, which I understand. That being said,
sure.
I don't, there's probably only one game I can think of all the games I played where I really felt like the outcome would have been different in the end. And it's because literally I think the Roman player got hit 9 times out of 10 in a 10-round game. And so my idea that I shot to him was, I said, hey, what if you had like a fate tracker that basically helped balance it out, so that every time someone got hit, you move the tracker in the opposite direction. And basically that would be something that says, okay, that's a DRM, a +1 D, you know, plus or minus depending on who it's to Rome. And that way it's going to kind of even out. And that way you make sure both sides are going to get hit by the fates.
Sure.
He actually said, well, actually, that's not a bad idea. I think we should cap it at plus or minus 1 DRM. And it's going to be this fate token, and it's actually going to be a variant for the tournament. Because, you know, tournament player, people usually want to feel like you've rewarded skilled play. And so it'll be a fate token, and when you get hit by that, the fate token will go to the other guy. And so now he's going to be likely to get hit by whatever the bad event is on the next turn. And so it's a way of it'll basically make it almost impossible for you to go on a super long stretch of getting nailed with the events, which I think is a positive. I just feel like without the random events, it's certainly not necessary for the game. The strategy cards provide enough variability that I'll probably be playing this for the rest of my life, I feel like. But the random events are so necessary, because if you read about that time period, literally Rome in one storm lost 300 ships and almost 100,000 Marines. Like you can't make that something that's a skill-based thing. You can't make it like, oh, here's a card mini game where we're going to now try to sail through these stormy waters. Like, you just have to have it be like, look, chaos came, and it happened to you in the pants.
What's really missing, Jonathan, dexterity. That's what they really do.
Yes, a Hands in the Sea dexterity mini expansion.
I do agree with the randomness for events. I mean, we were playing as a John Company, and Cole pretty much said any game in this time period that doesn't have some type of randomness for the events is just wishful thinking.
Absolutely.
And it always makes for interesting. I mean, we played John Company, and we had a whole round of the game where nothing shipped, and we were buying the dice to roll. We just had crappy rolls where one guy, nothing happened, and I got evicted from my freaking presidency, and the company generated 0. But so yeah, it's really hard to justify an historical game with the type of events that you described and not try to have it integrated somehow.
But like Joel pointed out too, is what you're going to see is almost all of those events. There's a few that are generic, like a plague, but most of them are going to, it does happen. But most of them are actually going to be weighted towards their historical kind of analog. And so Rome's not as good at sailing, but Rome doesn't have mercenaries. And so Carthage is going to be the one dealing with that. The Senate tended to quarrel a lot more in Carthage. And so the political infighting event that comes is going to hit Carthage more. I think it's beautiful. And the kind of the final thing I'll say about that is, I've started to play every tournament that I can in certain that I really love. And one of those is For the People. There's a lot of dice rolling where you roll a single die and you fight tons of battles. And so you would say, okay, there's a lot of luck in this. And yet the same individual, James Pay, has won every single world championship dating back to like 2002, except for one, in a field of usually like 60 plus people. And so it's like, okay, there's a lot of randomness, and there's a lot of randomness in when those cards come out in that game, because it's a CDG war game by, the great one, Mark Herman. Plug in that for Judd.
We can plug Washington's War where you at it too.
It's like, okay, so this game has a lot of randomness because whereas unlike Hands in the Sea, most of your battles will never see a die unless it's naval or you have elephants. Here in For the People, you're constantly chucking dice. And yes, there is, DRMs and things like that. There's a combat results table and things like that. But yet the same guy continues to win against large fields. Sure. So it's almost kind of like even something like, or even poker. It's like, well, why are some of these certain guys always performing at the top? Yes, there is luck. Yes, it is going to happen. But in the end, I think 95% of the time, the player who makes better decisions is probably going to win. And it doesn't mean that you're a worse player necessarily, even, but I played against one individual individually, played 6 games now. We've split 3 and 3, so we're going on our 7th. He's the one I played it with the most, and we've seen some wildly different outcomes just based upon totally different strategies. And it's not even so much how the events are coming out. It's not like, there had times where he's beating me by 20 or I beat him by 20, and it's not like the events pounded one guy versus another, although that did have the Rome getting hit 9 out of 10 game. But it's like, this game is definitely a game of skill because and it's a game that rewards good decisions and good calculated risks. And the reason I just say that is the biggest knock that people seem to put in this game is like, well, there's too much randomness, or I just got wrecked. Like, I had this beautiful navy, I built it up, and that's hard to see. Like, you build up your navy and then a storm at sea comes and wipes out half of it. Like, that just sucks. But okay, like Rome had that happen 3 times, and guess what? They came back and they kept punching. An event in the end, they kind of won the whole. They ended up winning the whole series. First through third period quarters because they were able to take more punches than Carthage was.
Sure.
And so I would encourage people to try it. Honestly, it's a game. It's a game that rewards good decision making. It rewards tinkering. Don't ever sit there and think that after you've played a few times, like I've seen so many people post things, even like on rating. I saw some people rate it bad. Yeah, I figured this game out after 2 games. It's like, that's not even possible. Like, all the strategy cards probably didn't even come out. Like, what are you even saying?
You beat your opponent twice in a row.
Yes.
You've got this game figured out.
And a great example is, so far, it seems like Carthage is the better side, according to this guy that I played. We had him play back and forth. In our 6 games that we finished to completion, Carthage won 5 out of 6, and so we were making a post about it. And this other guy was like, well, me and my buddy have played 11 times, and Rome has won 10 out of 11. It's like, okay, well, maybe that's just our group think, like getting in our own way, and we're kind of almost self-defeating ourselves because we keep trying the same avenue of attack. And maybe those guys, when they play Carthage, are always trying the same. Like, you need to constantly be experimenting and tinkering. And that's why I say, either of you guys, if you'd like to play, be happy to fire up a game, and because I love tinkering in this game. I love trying different combos, not just with the strategy cards, but what empire cards you're going to draft. That's a whole big game in and of itself. Of, do I want to go heavy for troops? Do I want to go try to build up heavy infantry as Carthage, try to match Romans the Roman legions? Do I want to just go heavy?
That sort of current. It's
Yep.
like a current, something to sort of cohere all of what you're doing together. You know, it's to just bring it all together. You know, and I really like that. I think I maybe invented a word there, but anyway, it's. I'm very intrigued by what you've said about this game, Jonathan. I did not realize a lot of the depth of the different game systems, and you've enumerated those and incredibly well versed in both mechanism-wise by your multiple games, but also by giving us the historical basis on it. So, I mean, dude, you've done an absolutely excellent job. Is there any, like, you know, if you could say, I think you've addressed a lot of, like, you know, the main complaint that people seem to have hit in a levy towards the game is randomness, and you've attacked that from a lot of different angles. And I think that not only have you attacked it, but you've also said, you know, there's options where you can play with a reduced randomness variant, and you basically invented it, dude. You basically like suggested and invented it. So I mean, like, you know, like
the fate token, yes, but the alternate cards was already in the base game.
Yeah, I know, but that fate token thing, that's pretty cool that you've got a piece here that's going to be a part of, like, tournament play. Like, you've actually impacted the game, because it's like maybe you're just sick of hearing people use, like, this sort of, like, discount a game because of, you know, they had a frustrating experience that they didn't want to actually consider themselves as responsible for it. You know, they just wanted to lean on the it's too random. So yeah, and I appreciate that. If you could, though, just say, you know, to kind of sum up, what is it that you love most about A Few Acres of Snow, you know, and what distinguishes it in the TLDR version of the Longview podcast? What would that be?
Yeah, gosh, and of all the, I should have had a TLDR at the end of all this. I think what I love about this game, about any game, is, do you have interesting decisions? And is it something where there are multiple inflection points in the game, or is it some, you know, like, I guess I just have to use a comparison. I'll try to keep this a TLDR, but one thing I love is Puerto Rico. But at Puerto Rico, very quickly, you're basically locked into a couple of strategies, either going hard on shipping and trying to drag the game out so you can ship as much as you can, or you're trying to get buildings and get the game completed so that the people who ship don't get to ship too much and you get your victory points from buildings.
Or sit next to the new player.
Yeah, or sit next to the new player who likes that. But it's basically, there's a couple inflection points in that game, and don't get me wrong, it's still a great game. I still love it. I still play it.
Yeah.
But this game has inflection points upon inflection points. And I love that it's a game that I will never feel like I have solved, whereas I almost feel like some really good games, you do get to a point where it's like, oh, now I'm 40 minutes in of a 90-minute game or a 2-hour game, but this guy's going to win. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
He's built the better engine. There's nothing I can do. He's outplayed me. That's never going to happen in this game. There's too much randomness just from the inputs of the strategy cards, and there's a million ways. And the designer has been very supportive. If at some point someone did come up with something, I'm very confident that he would, you know, look to address that, because that's always something I look at for games is a designer someone who supports their work. And I'll say Daniel.
Does he actually still play this game?
Yeah. So that's what I would say. This is a game, if you like interesting decisions, if you like a game that rewards repeated play and tinkering, this is a game for you. And probably one of the things I like best about it too is that it's not one that you have to, though, like, try to memorize cards like you see like some of the games I love most, like card game war games. It rewards you for memorizing the deck and knowing what's all out there. That's not here in this game, because there's 15 events and 15 strategy cards. There's not like a huge deck of events in there or anything like that, but it does reward repeated play and peeling back those layers of seeing, you know, those aha moments where it's like, oh, this card that I thought that he did, or this settlement that he decided to make, I thought that was foolish, and now I see he's just, you know, kicked my butt with it, and now I'm going to put that in my inventory for a move when I play my next game against someone else or something like that.
It's like you're getting better at the game because you're observing currents the game, you know, has and features, and not just because you're memorizing the 52 events in the deck. So,
yeah. Yeah, that's exactly. Like you could beat a player in, say, Twilight Struggle just by knowing the deck better than him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Or in a lot of games, and that part of the game. It also brings in a lower barrier of entry, which I think is great. Because if you're someone who's like, I'm not a grognard, I don't want to be pushing hex encounters, and I don't want to be sitting down for 8 hours to play a game. This game's not going to take that long. It's going to pack an 8 hours game worth of decisions into about a 2 to 3 hour space.
Well, there you go, man. That's the TLDR.
There you go.
That's awesome.
Took 3 minutes to get to my 10-second TLDR.
No, I really like it though, because you really have. You've also referenced Judd Vance, and there is your guy who's comfortable with the grognard types games.
Yep.
But his involvement in this game and his continued evangelism for it is another really telling aspect. So I think that aspect as well. You touched on every possible thing, man. This is really a comprehensive look at Hands in the Sea, which Few Acres of Snow came out, huge impact. Hands in the Sea, hopefully that impact has been increased by the work that we've done on this show tonight.
I hope so.
And I hope y'all will give it a try. I think you both like it, and if that will be reward enough if both of y'all try it. And
there you go, man. I definitely, it's you shot it right onto my radar. You've said the magic words, secret sauce.
Secret sauce.
I'm glad to hear it.
The answer is it's a mixture of ketchup and mayonnaise, but it's amazing.
Well, thank you guys for letting me talk about this.
Oh, no problem.
Oh, Jonathan, it's been so awesome. And
cool.
I think you've kind of mentioned, how people can find you, but I'd just like to invite everybody that's not already a member of the Longview Guild to join, and you'll see that the post about this episode, Jonathan just jumped right on there, and he's actively following that forum. If you're looking to play with him on Vassal, and you'd like to reach out there, find him on BGG. It's definitely something that I would love to do. I also want to just own the game, but like I've had that weird experience where it's like I get online and we start playing the game, and 2 weeks later I'm still playing the same game, and it's like, how do we play this game again? Like, what do you get points for again? But anyway, you've almost convinced me, but I'm just saying, if anybody has any sort of an interest, I'm sure that Jonathan would love to work with you there. You seem very committed to making sure that this game makes the type of splash that the Hands in the Sea deserve to make. So thank you very much, though, for agreeing to make this your first appearance of what I hope will be many other episodes that you are on that I will tune into, because I want to hear this same comprehensive, thematic, mechanical, together fusion in an episode that you have done that has been very characteristic of your style and something I've not seen many times before. So thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan.
Well, yeah, thank you. This is the perfect outlet to let me kind of ramble and go out into those rabbit holes. So I really appreciate it.
What we're here for.
TC, man, yeah, this has been an interesting game that I feel like it's like a mixture of Few Acres of Snow, which is one that I really like, and it's almost like it pushes it into like Time of Crisis, and you're like, this is like totally TCing the Few Acres of Snow, but then there's also elements that make me more interested too, so it's breaking my brain. I can't deal with it.
Play it.
No, you both need to play it. I think you'll both like it. I really do. I think it'll scratch an itch for both of you, and like you said too, feel free to contact me on BGG. You can find me there, or just Jonathan F. Or UMRMeche is my username. UMRMeche. Happy to play with anyone. I love this game, and I want more people to love it too, hopefully. So
there you go, man. Yeah, it's a game that's worth doing this for. It's a game that's not just worth this, but also worth teaching it to. And I totally get that, man. That's a passion that I'd love to be able to give you the outlet for. So thanks for joining us, Jonathan. TC, it's always great to see you, man.
Good to be here.
And thank you to everybody who's listened to this episode and anything from the Longview. So catch us. We'll be still, we're still in our week after week after week of releasing here. So hopefully, you'll check out our live recordings on YouTube, be able to share your own input. So thanks to everybody, the listeners, and have a great rest of your go at it. Great couple of weeks before we release the next episode of the Longview.
Have a good night, guys.